These times are coming. We told you about them, but you motherfuckers was sleeping. Now you gotta wake up.
The time has come. Low key.
Yeah.
Immortal technique.
Harlem, motherfucker. We here.
Let's make history. From West End to the West Bank, I write righteous rhymes with my right and wrestle the devil with my left hand. Never worked for a Zion, it's never been a yes man. My art is like Rembrandt painting pictures of death camps. The average person is allergic to the words of wisdom. This is for everyone, the Saddam's Kurdish murder victims, and all the pure souls that never had the chance to speak. Truth pumps in my arteries and causes my heart to beat. For soldiers haunted and tortured by guilty memories, who realize too late to reveal their real enemy. It's all dead wrong. For every victim of racist persecution, from Auschwitz to Hebron, my words may sting cowards. For people that were atomized by the third mate in the Twin Towers. Those living through the wars ask me what I do this for. Put the world in its place before it puts you in yours. You can try to avoid us, but it's pointless. You can never avoid the voices of the voiceless.
Take our freedom, take our pride. Come on, baby, we'll survive.
You can try to avoid us, but it's pointless. You can never avoid the voices of the voiceless.
Keep my third eye hidden under my New York fitted. A crazy unmarried man that deserves to be committed. The future is encrypted in my troubled lyrics. Dream that I've been somewhere for weeks and wake up in a couple minutes. Sweat dripping with visions of population control. Thoughts overflowing my world like the melting of the North Pole. My people are targeted by military crack committees, so I'm bucking at the feds like natives in Rapid City. Reality savage, my words are like a riot in Paris. The voice of the voiceless, that voice is social imbalance. So stand stronger, sit harder in your mental palace. Blinded inside the kingdom, united to its old habits. Middle passage coming, war chant, African drumming, Gatling gun humming, rapid fire mechanism. Reckless living that checks the rhythm of perfectionism. Slave condition while you singing God save the system.
You can try to avoid us, but it's pointless. You can never avoid the voices of the voiceless.
Take our freedom, take our pride. Come on, baby, we'll survive.
You can try to avoid us, but it's pointless. You can never avoid the voices of the voiceless. Detain my body, but you can't imprison my mind. If it's my time, I'll probably die with my fist in the sky. These are the thoughts of a man who can't escape from his coma. Cries of a young virgin girl who got raped by them soldiers.
Birthing a screaming bastard post-colonial nation, subject to childhood diseases, famine, war, and inflation. Education molded you into your master's image, and you forgot who the fuck you were before the war was finished.
You're hearing the ghosts of Nagasaki, you're hearing Hiroshima. Beautiful babies being born with the weirdest features. You might never see me in the chart, but inshallah my seed can see peace in Iraq.
But peace and freedom can never be given, that's historically forbidden. Cause only collision is the recipe, changing the course of destiny. So I'm strapped with weaponry, cause the government don't give a fuck about protecting me.
You can try to avoid us, but it's pointless. You can never avoid the voices of the voiceless.
Take our freedom, take our pride. Come on, baby, we'll survive.
You can try to avoid us, but it's pointless. You can never avoid the voices of the voiceless. Little man never did exams, got a particular bigger plan, flipping grams when a bigger man in his gang gave him a stick to bang. Or maybe just hokers, no one thought he would kill a man till he caught a silly Billy villain chilling in the jam, sipping sham, spliff in his hand, triggered in the jam. Bang, bang, biddy, bang, biddy, biddy, bang, now he's in the can. What a pity fan rappers are yapping and flapping their lips about how they're packing and clapping their sticks. Has to be big, the impact it has on the kids, tell me where the factory is. The their chips. You wonder why the youth them are strapped and they're pissed. If not a 9, it's a knife getting jabbed in your ribs. People die for the petrol and gas and our whip. In London, you can get shanked in the heart, still the government put more tax in the rock. Ignorant little spitters are talking greasy, cause they bitten bits that they saw on TV. If all you rap about is the holes in the dope, it's already too late. You sold them, you sold. You jokers act like you know, but you don't, cause there's little kids dying all over the globe.
My lights out on nights out, but days in spent blazing. They tell me to navigate ways in the mazes. A wow, it's wow, amazing to think. Now let the revolutionary sing. Stand up for your rights and fight for revolution. Free your mind and so ignite the Constitution. Cause they're killing us all. They're killing us all.
Revolution is needed, the truth, I speak it. If I gave you food for thought, would you eat it? I don't really know, it's silly though, cause if I promo your product in my video, then you give me gold just to act cool. But if I chat sense, it's whack fools act all backwards and blackball. Big time pricks wanna kill our music bit by bit. Take a look at the 696, is it Armageddon or the start of recession? The architect said we're far from the essence. We know the answers but aren't asking the questions. All the past lessons, we can't just forget them. Sheep MPs are like weak MCs, say they won't stop till we get free. Probably too busy playing on your PS3, wanna see the VMPEND. Just as on the net, the names ain't hidden. Wanna vacate these race hate villains, alienate these snakes and change Great Britain. Cause I love music but I hate racism. Quick to get a knife and stick it in your brother. Think you're tougher but still you're gonna suffer. Tears in the eyes of what you did to your mother. How we gonna fight back?
They used to put my lights out on nights out, but days in spent blazing. They tell me to navigate ways in the mazes. A wow, it's wow, amazing to think. Now let the revolutionary sing. Stand up for your rights and fight for revolution. Free your mind and so ignite the Constitution. Cause they're killing us all. They're killing us all. Stand up for your rights and fight for revolution. Free your mind and so ignite the Constitution. Cause they're killing us all. They're killing us all.
As you prepare your breakfast, think of others. Do not forget to feed the pigeons. As you wage your wars, think of others. Do not forget those who fight for peace. As you pay your water bill, think of others, those who are nursed by clouds. As you return home to your home, think of others. Do not forget the people of the camps. As you sleep and count the stars, think of others, those who have nowhere to sleep. As you liberate yourself with metaphors, think of others, those who have lost their right to speak. As you think of others far away, think of yourself and say, if only I were a candle in the night.
This is for Palestine and Quds, the capital Jerusalem. Unarmed people marching to the wall and they're shooting them. Suppression is a question, resistance is the answer. Long live Palestine, long live Gaza. Palestine and Quds, the capital Jerusalem. Unarmed people marching to the wall and they're shooting them. Suppression is a question, resistance is the answer. Long live Palestine, long live Gaza.
All you see is war every time you turn your head at night. There's bloodshed on the floor. Mother cries, who cries for her this time? There's truth between these walls. See the lies between the lines they hide. Where's the bullets coming from? From the tyrants dressed in our disguise.
I'm a rider till the end, even if I got to push back for all my friends. Cause you know that I'm a fighter, let me see a lighter. And we not gonna stop the Palestine is free. But still you know that I'm a rider till the end, even if I got to push back for all my friends. Cause you know that I'm a fighter, let me see a lighter. And we not gonna stop the Palestine is free.
Taught to not love, taught to be blind, taught to not care. Tell me what's real, borderlines, military despair. How to exist if there's no rights to be human in fear? And if you take away your home, where's the heart supposed to live? Taught to not love, taught to be blind, taught to not care. Tell me what's real, borderlines, military despair. How to exist if there's no rights to be human in fear? And if you take away your home, where's the heart supposed to live?
My people, long live Palestine. We will never let you go.
Sing it with me now. Free, free Palestine. 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 If Ibrahim Abu Thureya could resist without a wheelchair, 10-year challenge, tell Regev we are still here. And tell that killer Netanyahu he should feel fear. The old live through us and guarantee the children will care. Criminal, not invincible, and you know it. Sarmadoon still sitting in their stoic. May not feel us with you when you listen to our poems. You inspire humanity, your resistance is heroic regardless of talk. Here's time we answer the call. Through your strength of spirit you provide example for all. How to live, how to love when attacked from the clouds above. Loud and clear the songs you sung can't be drowned by the sound of guns. Won't just watch your tragic times through a satellite dish. The least that we can give you is an anthem like this. They panic tried to analyze and sanitize this, but we love you more than ever still. Palestine lives.
Free my people, long live Palestine. We will never let you go.
Sing it with me now. Free, free Palestine. 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 Free, free Palestine.
No change, no, run away your way. All the hate you face, time to change this state. No change, no, run away your way. All the hate you face, time to change this state. No change, no. Continuing oppression of the Palestinians, encircling of the people of Gaza, the killing of civilians, the burning of homes, the daily oppression, the theft of land, the apartheid system in the West Bank, where there are two road systems, and I've been, and I'm sure you have, and you see the Israeli road, you see like a spanking new highway with just the settler cars going backwards and forwards. Then you see the old Palestinian roads, and it's people living under two sets of laws. It's an apartheid system. So all this is being uncovered, and the boycotts and divestment and sanctions campaign, which I support, and I'm sure many other people do, as a peaceful protest against the Israeli oppression. Support groups have got to keep proclaiming the rights of the Palestinians are the right to return, the right to their homeland, really. And the theft of land is Israel is breaking international law. It is breaking the Geneva Convention.
If I set everything up fucking properly, then maybe I'll be audible. All right, um, this is, I mean, there is an important thing to harness from this, but there's a bit of self-indulgency here. I've always had a big fondness of microbiology, and going homeless, I got disconnected from so much, and even 6 years on from getting off the streets, there's still just like a lot of stuff I hadn't caught back up with regarding my intellectual interests and pursuits. I got so caught up in the struggle that like things that weren't directly associated with the viciousness of the cycle I wasn't able to focus on it as much. And I stumbled across something reminded me of someone I looked up to at school. This is one of my arguably my favorite thing, but it's one of my favorite parts of medicine through time I studied. And it's a story about the cholera outbreak of 1853. Um, Anyone who's been talking to me right now knows I've been going a bit crazy about bacteria. Now, cholera, or Vibrio cholerae, is a bacterium of the genus Vibrio. There's a lot of Vibrio out there. Most of them are not harmful, and then there's a few of them that are there's a type of Vibrione that infects oysters and clams and stuff, for example. I can't remember which species it is, but it's the only thing that comes close to cholera in having like an endemic relationship with people. But people carry cholera, like, so what is cholera? Cholera, the condition, is something that we call relating to what happens when cholera in the body, Vibrio cholerae, excretes what's called cholera toxin. Cholera toxin is something that cholera obtained from a bacteriophage. It's not something that it actually gains from its own plasmid DNA, like you would typically find with an excretion toxin of this kind. Antibiotic, antibacterial properties. Um, but this doesn't come from its own genetics. It comes from the genetics of a phage that targets cholera, um, and it gives it this almost like upgrade to its biofilm, and that biofilm is able to excrete cholera toxin, and that cholera toxin then causes dysentery, and you'll die of that dysentery. Outside of just cholera itself and the gruesomeness of this, what I really want to discuss is the importance in the movement for science communication and the need for us to preach what you could call um, a, a proper means of reaching out and communicating to people, and also just the way in which Jon Snow is both the scientist and the science communicator. That is what a Marxist is, a revolutionary, whatever you want to call yourself, anarchist, communist, I don't care. If you're a revolutionary of some actual serious standing, you are supposed to be a scientist and a science communicator. You have to produce material that conveys the understood science in a manner that can be understood, so that it is not alienating people and it is introducing people to the quandary, the issue. It's highlighting the most important facets and factors. It's pathologizing. It's it's it gets into like the importance of epidemiology and stuff like that, and how that affects the way that we look at population health, the way that that's an important part of our standing as representatives of the people. Population health is really important to us. If you're in a country like let's say Haiti right now, which has cholera outbreaks since the earthquake in 2010. um when we go look at like the cholera outbreaks in India, we go look at the cholera outbreaks, and India actually has some very specifically awful strain of cholera, the 0139 variant, um, very, very vicious strain of cholera. Or we can look at the countless crises amongst Africa. Communists in those regions are having to contend with those problems. It's an innate facet of like their existence. Uh, so like what we really need to break is, for the speaking to Imperial Core viewers here, is that we have a big problem of imperialism has afforded us the ability to have mega cities that are sanitized, uh, ungodly sized cities. And to be honest, sanitation is screwed because they're too big and they never were sanitizable. This story is going to get into a lot of the problems of that, and you're going to see the more vicious and openly degradative nature of the mega city concept with Victorian London. It just seems like we moved past that and now we made the mega city work. We exploited the problem. Imperialism has allowed us to sanitize the megacity, and only so far now that it's coming to bite us in the ass because you dump so much shit in the water and stuff starts to spread. You then get a fucker like RFK preaching to fucking end pasteurization, you know, what the fuck is that going to do for population level health? So it's really important that people think a little more about microbiology, about germ theory as Marxists, and not just about social theory all the time. Like we've got to, I mean, that's still related to our social theory. It's important to understand uh, population wide health and what that means for the community in regards to coordinating organization, the way in which that you can get people to see a common issue within their health, within the structure of life, within what's affecting them, and work together to congrue a common goal. And that's the Jon Snow story echoes a lot of that in a microcosmic fashion. And I think there's a lot we could learn from this. But yeah, it's a bit of an indulgency thing. I fucking love the story of Jon Snow, so like it might just be a fangirly scream. And might not be as useful as I'd hope, but you know, I'd like to shout out the channel that we're first watching. This is Patrick Kelly, and he does great videos on like medical history and stuff like that. Like y'all really need to check this motherfucker out. Like you know, uh, I he's got a good video on germ theory as well. That's fun watch. We won't end up probably watching it on this because I've got another cholera video that's more getting into like the current pathology of cholera today. That's more just education than anything, like rather than it being necessarily an extenuation of a new position or new point or whatever. No, it's just a echo the importance of understanding things at a very fine and deep level. And this is just one of many microbes. And as communists, we're not all biologists. We got to communicate with biologists. We're not all fucking microbe specialists. Fucking now, most of us don't even have a microscope. Yeah, you know, so like science communication is a big part of the philosophy of Marxism to be looking at the sciences as a means for how we build revolutionary struggle. Well, then we've got to be actually communicating those sciences and highlighting the scientists. And in saying that, let's get to Jon Snow, everyone. Love you.
One of the most famous stories in the history of medicine isn't true. The story goes something like this. In 1854, in the Soho neighborhood of London, there was a big outbreak of cholera and nobody knew why. Then one day, a local doctor named John Snow went around town interviewing people and drew a map of where the cholera deaths occurred. He noticed a big cluster of cases around the water pump on Broad Street and concluded that drinking the water from the pump made people sick. So he removed the pump handle and the outbreak stopped. This cute little story would earn Jon Snow eternal Wikipedia glory as the founder of epidemiology. Unfortunately, that story is oversimplified to the point where it isn't true anymore. And that's such a shame because the real story is so much more interesting. It's got something for everybody. Colonialism and empire, scientists versus policymakers, and a ton of infighting. And I wanted to do a thorough job on this video, so I traveled to London to do some archive work and see the sites firsthand. And the first
This was like the really big thing for this channel that was such a good introduction is that instantly he's like, yo, there's like a whole colonial question going on here and stuff like that. And I'm like, yo, we got a leftist. Oh, we got a leftist. Oh my god, the left are going on about the Vibrio cholerae. You don't have to worry about them. RFK says just drink your raw milk and be happy about it. The Vibrio cholerae, they're never going to do you no harm.
And the first thing you need to know is that cholera didn't come by surprise to London in the 1850s. At that point, they'd been dealing with cholera outbreaks for over 20 years.
Why is a chat member beefing about commies for? Like, you got something worth saying? Preach it or fucking beat it. The guys are so wrong. About what? Just wrong ones in general, I imagine, or some shit like that. You got nothing to say, you got nothing to preach. Get beat.
This is Vibrio cholerae, the bacterium that causes the disease
Back the
cholera,
fuck
and it
up
is
and get
very
smacked the
good at
fuck up.
spreading. While the infectious dose varies, some people only need to ingest 10 million Vibrio cholerae to contract the disease, which is surprisingly easy. According to the Ghost Map by Stephen Johnson, a glass of water could easily contain 200 million Vibrio cholerae without the slightest hint of cloudiness. Now, if you were to accidentally drink some contaminated water, most of the ingested bacteria would die off in your stomach's acid, and the few that survived would still have to burrow through the thick, mucus layer that lines the small intestine. But if they survive that, they attach to the actual small intestine cells and start replicating fast, at which point you are in for the messiest, most painful tummy ache of your life. The bacteria secrete cholera toxin, which leads to the classic symptoms of cholera: severe intestinal pain and fever, dehydration, and a violent, cloudy diarrhea called rice.
Now you gotta think there's two options here. Either cholera by incident is causing this, and there's some evidence to suggest this. I mean, the cholera toxin, like I said, it was given by bacteriophage, but the biofilm that they're forming, that the cholera toxin is being excreted to form, and part of that's protecting itself from other microbes. And another part of it's to communicate. So it might not be really trying necessarily to kill its host. The other suggestion is that it is, and it relies on basically devastating the host to spread itself. Cholera is carried by cholera. I don't know. I don't know where I put myself entirely, but that's kind of the big quandary in science is like what's going on. It's all about like because the bacteria typically don't intend to kill their host, but that doesn't mean that there isn't times where they do. Yersinia pestis. I don't know. I wasn't smart like a go with saying, but bubonic plague. Definitely not a sign of the bacterium trying to preserve its host. And pneumonic plague is another question. And septicemic plague, oh boy. So, like, yeah, that's a big quandary with stuff like this.
Water stool, which I do not recommend Google image searching. And that much water loss can lead to kidney failure or shock, which is ultimately how cholera would kill you. But before you died, you'd excrete the newly multiplied bacteria through your stool. And if that stool contaminated someone else's drinking water, then you just spread cholera. The disease first came to London in 1831, and despite studying cholera epidemics in the colonies, UK public health officials were woefully unprepared. When the first case was confirmed in October, the Board of Health wrote a comically bad column in the Medical Times and Gazette. I'll link it down with all my other sources in the description, but they recommend some typical home remedies before recommending laudanum, which is a mixture of alcohol and opium. None of this would have actually cured cholera, but the laudanum would have at least taken your mind off the diarrhea for a little. The board admits it is necessary.
I always say that when you get a bit of cholera, you just do some opium. It solves the problem. You just do a lot of laudanum. Solves all the problems. Cholera toxin be damned.
Necessary to state that no specific remedy has yet been ascertained, nor has any plan of cure been sufficiently commended by success to warrant its express recommendation from authority. Basically, there's no cure, but have we mentioned laudanum? They conclude by saying, the infection has been most virulent and has spread more rapidly and extensively in the districts of town where the streets are narrow and the population crowded, and where little or no attention has been paid to cleanliness and ventilation. They say this because they thought that diseases were spread through infected air, or what they called miasmas. I'll have a separate video all about it, but long story short, miasma theory said that noxious vapors actually caused infectious disease, and it was by far the most popular theory of disease transmission in Europe at the time. This first cholera epidemic left thousands of Londoners dead, which meant the government had to do something. And in February 1832, just 4 months after the first case of cholera in England, Parliament passed the Cholera Morbus Prevention Act, which gave their Board of Health a little more power in the name of preventing cholera. Unfortunately, it didn't have much immediate impact. Partly due to corruption, but also due to lack of actionable data. Like, individual doctors would have kept health records, and some port cities recorded who came in with disease, but for the most part, governments just didn't keep track of population-level health information. This is part of epidemiology, the field of medicine that tracks population-level health. But all of this was starting to change thanks to colonialism. See, colonizers had some big financial incentives to keep health records. They couldn't invade a country and take its resources if their crew got dysentery on the journey over, and they couldn't sell people into slavery if they died while being shipped across an ocean in a cargo hull with no ventilation. Population level health had a real impact on the English Empire's finances, so they were incentivized to pay attention. This is one of the first breaks with the standard Jon Snow myth. Snow didn't invent epidemiology on his own. The British Empire set up reporting systems that allowed doctors abroad to send health information back to London, and established public health infrastructure that let doctors study cholera epidemics in the colonies.
Yeah, this is like a really important thing to take from this is that there was a need for capitalism to develop epidemiological resources to maintain its colonial empire. And then other scientists picked up on this development of databases and stuff like that, and they expounded it into what we now call epidemiology. And John Snow wasn't the founder of epidemiology, but he's one of the founders of modern epidemiology, along with William Farr. And what's it? It's like the really important thing of understanding the consequences of colonialism in this story. Like the British did nothing out of the kindness of their hearts. It was all about money. It was all about economy. But like, what can we do as communists to flip the books on that and push epidemiology in the means to protect population health from capitalism? Epidemiology has often failed the people because it doesn't condemn capitalism a lot of the time in the way liberals perceive the health problems. They individualize things a lot. And even when they collectively understand an issue of like a class problem, for say, like the poor, they still find a way to externalize the problem from a general rot in the system. It's important that we stipulate the rot in the system. And a big part of that is understanding the bloodied history of epidemiology and the use of its resources to protect the outreaches of empire. Preserve property that's being sold in the bottom of ships and shit like that. Like not actual empathy or care and consideration that epidemiology ought to uh, 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 be beholden of. So it's like a really we can go understand is that this is a bloodied history regarding epidemiology. Countless millions died at the hands of British colonialism. Billions, if you talk about India alone, um, that died because of that system of oppression that eventually epidemiology was born out of the necessity for protecting the health of those people. Economy, economy, economy. And you're going to see that as a common theme throughout this. And my big stipulation, and we can dive deeper into it, is how do we as Marxists spin the whole situation on its head? And push epidemiology in a anti-colonial inclusive fashion in regards to how we apply ourselves as spokespeople, voices of the voiceless in that regard. It's a really big part of the difficult position that we're in. And Jon Snow goes through a similar experience of what he has to do as a science communicator and as a scientist, as doctor. He's a anesthesiologist, which is a very new practice at the time. And if anyone knows their Victorian history, you'll know people actually surprisingly took a while to take on anesthesia, even though it was like a godsend. Imagine having your arm severed off, amputated without anesthesia, or your guts operated on without anesthesia. Oh, we did and succeeded at such operations. I mean, with barbaric survival rates, but we found ways to do it, including like in panel operations, and it's gruesome. It's the same as like septic, antiseptic doctoral practices. Like less than 200 years old. The guy who told people to wash their hands before, you know, delivering a baby after they've gone worked in the morgue, was put into a mental asylum and died of septicemia. The thing he was warning people of as the culprit for the murder of all those women. So like there's a countlessly repetitive thing about a theme about these things, and that's that it is a poisoned, bloodied history. And I just want to nail that in constantly as we go through this, that like it's not something that you can pass away into the back of your mind and not have to think about. It's a present aspect of where epidemiology got its roots, and we can't obscure or obfuscate that. Otherwise, that would be an erasure of an ungodly amount of crimes against humanity, and it would be contrary to to the radical approach. It'd be contrary to the radical approach towards epidemiology to not discuss those things and not stand to the contrary of reactionary epidemiological practices.
This was decades before Snow's big break. Like when cholera outbreaks hit Cuba and Jamaica in the 1830s, the UK sent out doctors to investigate. It was for scummy financial reasons, but the Brits were getting experience in population-level health. Today, we'd call this epidemiological surveillance, collecting health data to inform policy and action. And this turned out to be a pretty good strategy in the colonies, so the UK rolled out
The Biden government has been doing epidemiological surveillance on the American people, whatever the fuck that means. Why would you do epidemiological surveillance on the American people, the freest people? We should not be surveilled by your epidemiologicalists. We are not your guinea pigs.
policy and
Sorry,
action.
Trump isn't.
And this turned out to be a pretty good strategy in the colonies, so the UK rolled out a similar program at home. Again, from an economic self-interest perspective, you gotta keep the working class healthy to keep them productive, you know? So in 1836, Parliament created the General Register's Office as a way to gather mortality data like births and deaths. This would let them track and eventually improve public health. And this is where William Farr comes in. He's a massively underrated epidemiologist compared to John Snow. Farr was a surgeon, apothecary, and stats nerd who worked for the Office of the Registrar General, and his whole life was data. He talked to doctors across the country for years and tried to persuade them to include more information with their mortality reports. And eventually, he was able to charm enough doctors that he could report cause of death, location, age, and occupation of the deceased in his publication, called the Weekly Returns. And all of this new data seemed to point to one trend. Infectious disease loves dense cities, and loved the grimy, grungy, working-class neighborhoods most of all. And that leads us to our second main character, Edwin Chadwick, a progressive reformer charged with tackling the sanitation problem in poor neighborhoods. As a miasma believer, he thought that some kind of environmental condition might be leading to more miasmas, which were getting these poor people sick. So, fast forward to 1838, and a gnarly outbreak of typhus had come to London.
The progressive reformers, just for some clearing up on, this was in the period of time when Sir Robert Peel and people like that were causing a dynamic shift in the Tory party, and there was a split that was almost fully formalized between the I guess what you would now call the 1922 Commission, which is the supposedly supposed to be the Robert Peelers, but it was supposed to be the moderates, the liberals. I don't think the Tories necessarily played up right to being the 1922 Commission. We could sit and squabble all over that, but I'm just pointing out that that's what the progressive reformers represented, was a shift in the dynamic of the Tories, um, uh, just towards a more liberal approach in society and a more, I guess, humanitarian zeal, but like not really. I mean, individuals and certain people had that kind of thing on, and the state can give shit about stuff like that. This is the thing about ideology and reality, is they're very different to each other in a lot of the cases. It's very important to make sure ideology matches reality. The Tories, why is it a difficulty with that one?
Sick. So, fast forward to 1838, and a gnarly outbreak of typhus had come to London. Chadwick goes to the Poor Law Board, a kind of proto-welfare commission, and convinces them to let him investigate the outbreak. Then he invites a couple doctor collaborators to help interview union leaders, talk to factory supervisors, police, anyone who actually knew what was going on with poor people.
typhus or typhoid. I'm pretty sure it's caused by rickets, or rickettsia. So I can't remember the name. It's named after the scientist Ricketts. I don't know why they made it both the genus and the specimen, but badass name. But I'm pretty sure that's the one that causes typhus, because it's also the one that causes spotty mounted rocky fever, which also has other names. I don't know. This is a thing with like the long history we've had with being infected by these things. So we have names for the like specific diseases that crop up when like, we get bitten by this thing that causes that. We didn't fucking know for like God knows how long the ticks biting you, giving you spotty mouth rocket fever. It was a bacterium that's causing it. But yeah, just trailing off a bit.
To factory supervisors, police, anyone who actually knew what was going on with poor people. I know, entertaining people's lived experiences. How novel. Then in 1842, he released the Report from the Poor Law Commissioners on an Inquiry into the Sanitary Conditions of the Laboring Population of Great Britain. And it was, despite the lengthy title, a smash hit. Well, a smash hit as far as reports about sanitary conditions go. It's a low bar. See, London was going through some growing pains. Thanks to the economic growth that came with the Industrial Revolution, London's population grew from 1.5 million people in 1800 to 6.6 million people in 1900. In 1851,
So like this is a really big thing to communicate. It's just like this is impossible. We've got some of those slum house dwellings still in our town. Like what you'll see is you'll see uh like Victorian era houses. You'll see them, and they'll have like and almost like another house that extends out the back as you see them coming out the where the toilet, the lavatory is. This is really tight and dense housing. Well, it got to the point where, boom, where the lavatory is, that's going to be more further down the thing because they build like another house section coming out the back. I mean, this is a little later on in the period, late Victorian, coming into early 20th century. This is more early Victorian here, in this image. But eventually, the slum housing got so bad and so cheaply constructed that they just started building like almost like a second house coming out of the back. And then you would sit people in a room each, and you'd have a family up to 4 families, 6 families, whatever you could cram in there. Would be living in these dwellings and sharing a house together, and you can still see the remnants of these houses that have been turned into one home, but they used to be many homes that were cramped and over poorly hygiene had poor hygiene. Sorry, I'm recovering a bit from a shroom trip, so my brain's a bit fucking dorky.
the Industrial Revolution, London's population grew from 1.5 million
It's
people in 1800
unsustainable.
to 6.
Now, let me point out, so it's 10 million today. There's how much it is today. It's like 10.7 million people live in London today. So, like, the difference between London's size today, population density and stuff like that, the population density is now lower, thankfully. But not by much. And what's it? The population hasn't actually changed all that much in size, relatively speaking, to the rest of the population of the country. Um, what London has, as it's always going to have this sickly element, they've just managed to clear it up enough so that you cannot think about it. But go swim in the fucking Thames. Go on. Go swim in the Thames. Gulp some of that water down. Go on. Go on. You're going to get some fucking dysentery. Fucking A, you can probably find parts of the Thames of Vibrio cholera is still fucking living, waiting for its time to hit again. Who knows? Like, that's the crazy environment that exists with the megacity, is that it's an invitation for epidemic and for pollution and for damage to the health of people. And you're going to see how that gets conflated into the miasma theory throughout this story, and the difficulty that Jon Snow had in trying to dispel the theory of miasma as the vector of Vibrio cholerae. Wasn't the air, it was the water. That's what Jon Snow taught us, was to think about the water, not the winter, the water. He said the water is coming. It's coming from the Broad Street pump, and you gotta stop it. If you don't stop it, people will poo themselves to death. You don't want people to poo themselves to death.
6.6 million people in 1900. In 1851, there were 2.5 million people within a 30-mile radius of London, which made it the most populous city in the world at the time, and it was incredibly dense. Parts of the Soho neighborhood in particular, the home of the Broad Street Pump, had 432 people per acre, which is more than 4 times more dense than modern Manhattan. In his report, Chadwick describes how all the recent industrialization has had some clear negative impacts on public health, and if it continued, poor people were going to get screwed over way more than the rich. And this wasn't isolated to typhus. Doctors had been noticing diseases like tuberculosis creep out from the slums and into the greater London area. Plus, a French doctor had recently shown that poverty and dense urban neighborhoods led to disease. Up until this point, this new style of urban megacity was suspected of being unhealthy, but the Chadwick report solidified it. One of the big problems that Chadwick identified was the sewage situation, which means it's time for a primer on Victorian plumbing infrastructure. I'm sure the moment you've all been waiting for. If you were working class, you probably would have pooped into a chamber pot. And if you had some money, you might have used an earth closet, a kind of dry toilet. But no matter what you pooped into, your excrement was disposed of in a nearby cesspit, an underground brick pit or alley that turned your neighborhood into a latrine the size of a city block.
You can still find remnants of these things. I mean, look at that fucking picture. That picture isn't like old. That's modern. I do believe that's a modern photograph of a Victorian era pit. But you still even get parts of the world where cesspits and stuff like that is a reality part of having no plumbing, having no education on proper sanitary, on how to deal with waste product and the problems that come with that. Um, I mean, just look at how fucking nasty that water is. Oh, and yeah, this was a problem. Human waste contains E. coli. E. coli is what creates the smell in your poo, which is methane. E. coli actually uses methane to communicate. So, like, the smell of your farts is actually the way E. coli speak. So, technically, you have had some in-depth relations with, I mean, well, it's a one-way conversation, but you've had some in-depth relations with the gut bacterium inside your body. Every time you fart, they're sending messages. Who knows what the messages are, but every time you poop, they're sending them messages. They're sending them loud and clear.
Some of these pits hooked up to bigger pits and sewer lines that dumped into the River Thames, but for the most part, the waste just sat there.
God.
Also,
Like, that's the thing. Like, it doesn't dwell enough on this. This is a sewer line. Like, it's a just a dreary pit that barely what you would call a functional sewer compared to like the sophisticated stuff we got now. I mean, look at the guy at the bottom left here. Like motherfucker is like fucking knee deep in other people's poo. Like, and it's not just like the water. Look at the piling up of just fucking shit, bile, and just excrement and trash and everything else that's appearing in people's poopies. That's some nice in-depth detail on the poopies of the 1800s for you.
Also, just an aside, sometimes these cesspits leaked highly flammable methane, which would explode into fireballs. Now, flushing toilets were a thing by the 1840s, but they ultimately emptied into the Thames too, which was getting more and more polluted thanks to all this wastewater. Drinking water was a whole other problem. See, sewage laws were regulated by local parish governments, not coordinated citywide planning. So by the mid-18...
A parish is like a town or a village. It's centered around having a local community church. Like my town is technically you could call it a singular parish. It's actually multiple parishes. Like there's I mean I guess not anymore technically, but like you still got like parishes for all the different villages in my town that make up the town. It's a part of the rural history that goes into the little mining village, little mining town. That my town once was. Uh, Fortunately, sacrifice zones. We were a car building town as well. Pioneers of working class specific motor vehicles that targeted the mine industry. Miners were the bottom tier of worker as far as people would identify. Steel workers were the ones that would typically be seen with respect, but mine workers were, I mean, steel workers weren't seen with respect. I just mean amongst the working class themselves. I mean, metal workers is literally why uh, fucking heavy metal has its name. It was a slur that was thrown against the metal workers that were forming a lot of these bands. Tony Iommi literally lost his fucking fingertips working in a canning factory. I think it was. I think it was a canning factory. It was some kind of factory. He was doing some fucking machine labor, and he fucking lost two of his fingertips. Guy still decided to keep playing guitar with the same fucking hand, and then like it was like 3 decades later, it was like, I probably should just learn how to play with the other hand. It's like, my solos might have been better. He's a good guitarist. He's got good shit, and I'm like, I think so too. I'm like, shit. There's like a Sabbath we didn't see where Tony wasn't so limited. Um, yeah, I guess rest in peace, Ozzy. But fuck Sharon, fucking witch. Burn the witch! I mean, well, being a witch is actually kind of cool, so I won't say that. Burn the bitch! There we go. She is a fucking. Oh, God. So much shit I could say about that fucking evil cow and the shit she's done. Ooh, her efforts to censor the Palestinian Intifada is a whole video in and of itself. Let's get back into the explodey methane cesspits with the poo poo. In the water.
Regulated by local parish governments, not coordinated citywide planning. So by the mid 1800s, there were over 200 local sewage acts in London and 10 privately owned water companies. And one of their services was supplying water to above ground pumps where people could get drinking water. These companies got their water from different intake points on the Thames.
We still have water companies to this day, like for our water providers. It's not just like a thing the state provides for you, and then maybe you pay like just a regular tax. I mean, it comes out that way in a certain sense in how they speak it, but you pay a water bill. I haven't paid mine in years, so I probably owe them a lot of money, but I haven't paid a lot of bills. That I maybe should have. Fucking, I don't have enough money. Poverty just be like that, where you're like, fuck it, my credit score can just die then, I guess. But like, it's a vestige of this time where like the ANCAPs. I'm sure the ANCAPs would love Victorian Britain, where um the fire department is like, who knows which company is going to come help you out. There was a problem with that where, like, a lot of the fire protection services, it was like in the 1700s, more so in the 1800s, but I still think it intersected over. It was all done by like insurance companies and fire departments that were for profit, essentially, or private at the very least, I guess would be a better way of putting it. And so you paid directly to have a service. If you didn't pay for the service, come put your shit out unless it burns some fucking guy's shit that's paid for a service. They ain't got responsibility for you. What? It costs money. That's the world of Victorian Britain. And it's capitalism in the most brutal sense. If you could say mercantilism is crony capitalism, is what the bourgeoisie likes to call it. Well, then, if that's crony capitalism and this is true capitalism, Victorian Britain, the humanizers of the world, Victorian humanism, civilization, blah 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 blah. Can the Indian be white? Et cetera, racism. Um, it's, uh, you know, they're correct. Uh, Victorian Britain is capitalism, imperialist capitalism, without the mask, without the we've exported all our problems to fucking Indonesia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Burma, fucking Thailand, Vietnam. A lot of stuff we fucking just offshoot to China because they're doing their own little workshop of the worlds to do their own little imperialism thing. It's a big part of understanding like the nature of capitalism is being able to grasp what it truly is. And you can't do that for a lot of people in the modern day because they only want to look at the what they see around them in their own little middle class existence in an imperial core where in the middle of the Holocaust, everyone's just going to work and being normal. We're not having like a mass strike and ending it all, or like people joining the international brigades like we had fucking fighting fascism 70, 80 years ago. Everyone's just going about their lives like nothing matters. That's capitalist realism. It's not capitalist reality. Capitalist reality is much more Kenya, much more Haiti, much more Sudan, much more Palestine. So, like, if if we're gonna represent stuff properly, Britain as a capitalist entity, this is what it is to this day. It is just masked it up. And we're going to see as this crisis, this Great Depression unfolds, we're going to see that mask come off. We're already seeing it in their efforts to genocide my community. We're already seeing it. We're on like what, the eighth stage of genocide at this point, seventh stage, eighth stage. We're like on our way. The dissemination's here. Trans youth, if you're under the age of 18, the only fucking trans care you can get is conversion therapy. Like, the brutality of barbarism is showing its teeth, and it's going to be these teeth, the same teeth the RFK Jr. threatens to flex. I might have to do the germ theory video actually, because that touches on some stuff to bring up about RFK. It'd be more of an indulgency thing. I might do that before we get onto the other cholera video. I don't know if anyone is actually watching or wants to quandary with that, let me know because I'm down to do the germ theory thing. Because I think this RFK issue is a very historical one that gets into like all of the fucking anti-vaxxers from 150 years ago and their bullshit and the stuff built on bullshit like Zyme theory and things like that and miasma. I mean, we've touched upon miasma already in this video. RFK Jr. is a miasmist. He actually believes miasma theory is the main pathology of disease, which is amazing for someone who hangs around carcasses a lot. I mean, when he was a kid at school, teenager, he used to play with his falcon by a pit that was near a farm where actually I think he might have been in university but like um it was a fancy pantsy university and he didn't kind of fit in. There's this weird side of RFK where like you're like, oh my god, there could have been a better fucking time for him, like the time he threatened a cop with his fucking falcon on, like he had the falcon under his jacket. Like it wasn't just a threat and the falcon wasn't there. Mandem had his falcon with him and threatened a cop with it, to like to cause them to back off from like black protesters. There's like some cool shit. They're like, you're like, yo, why don't we have that guy? Like, no, we've got the hangs around by cow carcasses. Like, guy literally hung around cow carcasses with his fucking falcon playing with the carcasses, and he's like, "Oh, I believe miasma theory." Well, what the fuck is crawling in his body then? If miasma is the pathogen for illness, I actually have this theory that RFK Jr. has managed to inoculate himself to things that we didn't think could be inoculated for. Like Mandem is like possibly immune to the plague. I don't know. Does he eat prairie dogs? Because like that might be a test, we could see, like, because I mean, if he's handing down prairie dogs got fleas, and they can bite humans, and they carry Yersinia pestis as a biological reservoir. Mostly asymptomatic. So, like, there's a whole thing we can do that. Whole song and dance. So, like, we've got to be very vigilant with RFK Jr. and what he represents as a danger to epidemiology in society, not just in America, but in Britain too. Because his ideas are not unique to him. He's one of many voices that have been pushing this war against germ theory for 200 years, and they are getting ground. Not winning on a scientific basis, no, a political one. Of course it would be. Why wouldn't it be? Onward.
Same river everyone was dumping their wastewater into. As a bonus source of danger, those sketchy brick cesspits could leak and contaminate the drinking water after it had been drawn from the Thames, giving you another way of ingesting your neighbor's cholera excreta. Knowing what you know about cholera, you can see the problem here. Wastewater had a few routes for getting into your drinking water. And while Edwin Chadwick didn't know how cholera worked, he still concluded that you could seriously reduce overall illness and mortality by implementing some kind of waste removal system. So he started working with a sewer engineer to design a brand new citywide sewer system, one that would pump a constant supply of fresh water into people's homes with a separate line that routed wastewater to the countryside where it would be repurposed as manure, which would keep the river clean. It was a great idea that probably would have saved a lot of lives, but neither Chadwick nor the Poor Law Board had the authority to pull it off. Remember, London was not only the biggest city in the world, but it was fractured into all kinds of local governing bodies. So to get the kind of legislative firepower he'd need, Chadwick didn't make a public health argument. He made an economic argument. Chadwick campaigned for years to make any kind of change, and eventually he convinced Parliament that investing in public health would improve the economy. Literally, that's what it says in the bill. This resulted in two laws passed in 1848. The first was the Public Health Act, which created a temporary General Board of Health with a 5-year conditional approval. They'd have the power to approve local government sanitation spending and give some guidance during epidemics, and their first president would be Edwin Chadwick. The second law was a revision to the Nuisances Removal and Disease Prevention Act. In practicality, this gave individual neighborhood parishes the power to deal with public health issues. And by public health issues, we're really just talking about poop. The law states that if any dwelling house or building is in a filthy and unwholesome condition, or that there are upon such premises any foul and offensive cesspool, drain, gutter, or ditch, or any accumulations of filth, or that swine are so kept as to be a nuisance or injurious to health, the authorities shall examine or cause the premises to be examined, and if upon examination or upon a medical certificate of 2 legally qualified practitioners, it appears that the nuisance exists, then they'd make you deal with the nuisance at the owner's expense. Basically, get rid of the cesspits and get rid of them now. And oh boy, did they. Over the next few years, these local parishes destroyed tens of thousands of pits, but there was just one little problem. People still needed to poop.
And
Unfortunately, Chadwick's vision for a sparkly new sewage system was still years away. So in the meantime, people's best option.
Wrong thing. There we go. Not just that people needed to poop, but it's also just that it's the cesspits themselves. If you're destroying these cesspits, where the fuck is we saw the picture before, remember? It's a massive pit. It's like the size of a fucking city corner block, but underground. It's a big ass thing. To deal with the cesspit, you're dumping that shit in the Thames, in the sewer system. So it's not just that you're adding your poop, you're adding all that cesspit poop too. That's probably had Vibrio cholerae breeding in there, fighting for life against all the E. coli and hence the methane. E. coli uses methane to communicate. But I'll just let the video speak for it, but I think y'all can see what I'm saying here and what's coming next. Oh my.
Just one little problem. People still needed to poop. And unfortunately, Chadwick's vision for a sparkly new sewage system was still years away, so in the meantime, people's best option was to dump their waste into the sewers, which flowed into the Thames. And so, we get one of the biggest unexpected consequences in public health history. The Nuisances Removal Act actually increased the amount of cholera bacteria in the drinking water. It would be hilarious if it weren't for the epidemic levels of death. But if you believed in the miasma theory like Chadwick, then this was fine. A polluted river wasn't ideal, but it was better than the noxious fumes coming from the cesspit. Now, all of this legislation was happening during London's second cholera epidemic, which started earlier in 1848 and lasted until 1849, at which point our old statistician friend William Farr started assembling a report. And after sifting through all that data, Farr saw a pattern that led him to a novel, albeit totally incorrect hypothesis. He said that cholera infections varied inversely with elevation. So if you lived at sea level, close to the river, you got sick more often. If you lived up on a hill, you got sick less often. And it was classic miasmatous thinking. The miasma vapors from the Thames were getting you sick, so living further away from the source of the stink kept you safe. Now viewers, I don't need to tell you that Farr was seeing a correlation, not a causation, and he was called out for it. A local doctor called the elevation hypothesis a remarkable coincidence, and that doctor was none other than Jon Snow, the guy that supposedly this video is about, but it's being introduced at what, the 13-minute mark? Some short background on Snow. He was a bit of an outsider in the
The water is coming. That's what Jon Snow warned us about. He said the water is coming, and it is full of Vibrio cholerae. You need to be careful of the Broad Street pump. Water is coming.
Being introduced at what, the 13-minute mark? Some short background on Snow. He was a bit of an outsider in the London medical community. He was an anesthesiologist, which if you watched my video on the topic, and you can find that right here, you know it was a brand new profession at this point. Snow was only 18 years old during the 1831 cholera outbreak, and thought about the disease like a normal miasma believer. But following the 1849 outbreak, Snow noticed something. Cholera didn't start with systemic symptoms like fever or the chills, but with local symptoms isolated to the gut. In cholera, the alimentary canal is first affected, and
This is prior to germ theory. I just gotta point that out. Germ theory, I think, was published in 1856. I think so. Let me double check that actually. Because I don't have a good date on that one. Theory, Louis Pasteur. 1861 is what I'm seeing here. In 1861, Louis Pasteur published his groundbreaking work on germ theory, establishing that microorganisms are the cause of many diseases, fundamentally changing medical science. This is in 1861. This that you're reading here is in 1849, I do believe that was written. So let's let the video continue on. I'm interrupting.
local symptoms isolated to the gut. In cholera, the alimentary canal is first affected, and that all the symptoms not referable to that part are consecutive and apparently the result of the local affection. In this case, the local affection was the tidal wave of diarrhea acting in the intestines. So Snow reasoned that something was acting directly in the gut to have such a sharp effect. And whatever that thing was must be ingested by mouth and excreted in the diarrhea. Having rejected effluvia and the poisoning of the blood in the first instance, and being led to the conclusion that the disease is communicated by something that acts directly on the alimentary canal, the excretions of the sick at once suggest themselves as containing some material which, being accidentally swallowed, might attach itself to the mucous membrane of the small intestine and there multiply itself by the appropriation of surrounding matter, in virtue of molecular changes going on within it, or capable of going on as soon as it is placed in congenial circumstances. And it's an interesting conclusion. He knew cells and microbes were a thing, but he didn't have any microscopic evidence that a germ caused cholera. But thanks to all of Farr's data collection, he did have death statistics broken down by geography, and he noticed that the south of London had a much bigger per capita death rate than the other areas. And after noticing that these neighborhoods were supplied with water from a more polluted part of the Thames, his hypothesis started coming together. Something in the water could transmit cholera. This is our second big break with the standard Jon Snow myth. He didn't have a breakthrough moment after investigating cholera in 1854, he came up with the idea 6 years earlier. Snow published his own cholera report on the mode of the communication of cholera in 1849, and it didn't really convince anyone that the disease was waterborne. In fact, our dear friend William Farr read the report and thought it actually supported his elevation hypothesis. All that contaminated water was spewing out miasmas, which was the true source of the infection, and he admits this much in his 1852 report. The wide, simmering waters were breathing incessantly into the vast sleeping city tainted vapors, which the temperature of the air at night would not sustain. God, that's beautiful. Either way, Farr started reporting where the deceased got their water from in his weekly reports from there on out. So by the end of the epidemic, nobody believed Snow's idea. And to be fair, he was making revolutionary claims without good evidence to support his argument. Now, unluckily for Snow, but luckily for the people of London, 1850 through 1853 were quiet cholera years, so Snow spent that time reading as much as he could about outbreaks across England, especially through Farr's reports. But cholera finally came back in 1853, which gave Snow an opportunity to prove he was right. This third epidemic really started heating up by the summer of 1854. By mid-August, London was seeing 644 cases of cholera a week. On July 31st of 1854, the original Board of Health's 5-year run was coming to a close, and since Parliament was pretty sick of Chadwick at this point, they dissolved his board and replaced it with a new, weaker Board of Health the next day, August 1st. On August 12th, they named a new board president, Sir Benjamin Hall, who immediately started building a team to investigate the outbreak and help the sick. I know he's no Chadwick.
Is to disband the one and then form a weaker version of a public support board. That is so British. Like, well, this public institution, it's helping people too much. It wants us to do all these reforms and stuff. So we gotta defang it. Oh my God. Don't know why I'm American.
Who immediately started building a team to investigate the outbreak and help the sick. I know he's no Chadwick, but he seems to care. At the same time, John Snow had been reading as much about the epidemic as he could and was preparing a report of South London. Cases kept picking up in August, but on Friday, September 1st, cases started spiking, led by a particularly sharp rise in cases in the Golden Square area of Soho, Snow's home turf. So that Sunday, September 3rd, Snow comes out to Golden Square so he can analyze water from their multiple water pumps, including the now famous Broad Street pump. He was certain he'd find something that proved cholera was waterborne, but he didn't find anything out of the ordinary in his analysis, so he needed a different strategy. Snow had been following the water company infrastructure story ever since the 1848 epidemic, and he knew only 2 companies supplied the outbreak zone: Southwark and Vauxhall, or S&V, which pumped in water from the Battersea area, and Lambeth, who used to get their water from a little further downstream, but had since switched to a cleaner section of the Thames, which was miles upstream. This gave Snow a natural experiment. The houses were right next to each other, so they'd be exposed to the same miasmas, but houses supplied by S&V drank dirtier water, so they ought to have more cholera cases than houses supplied by Lambeth. And sure enough, Snow's analysis showed that no household supplied by Lambeth got cholera, but about 1% of households supplied by S&V did. But there were some confounders. Lambeth tended to supply wealthier, cleaner neighborhoods, while S&V supplied smoggier, more industrial neighborhoods. So while Snow must have been stoked to get any quality of supporting evidence, the miasma model could still explain the delta in deaths, so he would need even more detail to prove his hypothesis. At this point, Snow goes door to door and does his interviews. That part of the standard Jon Snow myth is true. And
This is like the important part of like what's going on here and why I'm bringing this up as an important part of like communist work. We can't just always be thinking in this like one dimensionalism that like a lot of these so-called communist parties do. Where it's revolution or book club and there isn't really much in between and no one really cares about much else. So this kind of work where we're like doing, I mean, there was a real life Jon Snow. I mean, Jon Snow is real, but like I mean like a modern day Jon Snow in India. I can't remember the guy's name, but he did the exact same thing. He tracked the pathology of cholera in the drinking water. He tracked what companies were providing what water from where. And he, attenuated the cutting off of that water supply and the move to a cleaner water supply. It is like 1-to-1 the Jon Snow story, but modern day. If I can find it, we can dive into it. But it's a very good look into like the importance of this street science work where like we're figuring out epidemic problems, pandemic problems. I don't think communists did enough in the coronavirus, for example, to figure out the issues, the health problems associated, and to provide the proper care and support for people within that crisis. It's a hard crisis to provide anything for, but we dropped the ball. We dropped the ball on the deadly aspects of fluenza. We dropped the ball on a lot of the stuff. We dropped the ball on pushing the importance of vaccines. There's just a lot of shit when it comes to population health that we need to be focused on. That's a little less just preaching and a lot more street work, door to door interviews, conversations. You've got to gather an understanding of what's going on, what's causing the problem, and like how we can come to a community solution. And we don't have state backing. We don't have none of that. We go build our community solutions. So like it's a more complex question for communists, of course. But there's a big aspect of this science communicative information what's the word, digestible information that's really, really important. And the map that Jon Snow actually creates is a good example of where science communication focuses on the core aspect of what it's trying to specifically conversate towards. And I think that with the outgrow of measles in the United States, that we could be considering the need for a more conscious approach towards epidemiology as communists, because measles is not the only thing that lurks in the waters of America, that lurks in the fucking milk of cows. You want the fucking bacterium? What's it? Lactase, I think it's called. No, not that one. What's it called? It's like Listeria genus, uh, named after Joseph Lister, who was the guy who invented Listerine. Well, he didn't invent it. He invented the use of it as an antiseptic in surgery. It actually originally was I mean, it's kind of miasmus thinking as to why they used it. It's a sewer cleaner. And so the whole reason that you considered it was kind of from a miasmist perspective. That's why they sprayed it over the wound, like as an aerosol, so that like it engulfed the area and neutralized any miasmas as well as keeping the wound clean. It worked though. The Listerine today is still used as a mouthwash. That's sewer cleaner. You're welcome for that thought for the next time you go wash your mouth out with Listerine. But yeah, the genus Listeria is named after Joseph Lister. And they're the bacterium that will be in your milk if you don't pasteurize it. And it's the bacterium that eventually multiplies in milk anyway, because some of the spores are likely to survive, and that's why when your milk goes bad, you get that lactase film. Not lactase, sorry. Lactase is what they're producing, listeria, to feed. It's the sugar in, lactulose, lactase. It's the sugar that's created by milk. Ace is just implying a sugar, like fructose, glucose, um, fructase. You can. So I can't remember what I was gonna say now. Um, I was so lost in my thought. But oh, that's it, milk. So that uh um is it citric acid? There's an acid that forms on the top of your milk. It's not water. It's not a separation of milk and water like people tend to think it is. What is actually happening is the bacterium is consuming the sugars in the milk, and then they produce a kind of acidic byproduct, and that's the smelly stuff that makes your milk go wow when it goes bad. That's still bacterium. Pasteurization doesn't kill everything; it just kills what's living. You know, well, what's living that can be killed through heat. And the hope is that you drink it before any spores become a problem. You know, that they'll just die in your stomach acid. And you know, listeria is an issue like that. Listeria is not good at handling super extreme conditions, but if it's allowed to multiply loads, and there's different types of listeria that infect milk, and they work differently. So I am being a bit reductive with this, but if you're not pasteurizing, then you're drinking a drink with it's these fucking bots all the time. But then you're drinking a drink with hundreds of billions of bacteria. You'd be surprised how many bacteria could fit in a glass. I mean, you could drink a glass of water with 200 million Vibriones in there, Vibrio cholerae, and you wouldn't see a cloud. It's clear. It's like looking at fresh water. So you get to understand Jon Snow is really pushing revolutionary science and revolutionary claims. It's not like it was obvious that the cholera water, it looks stinky and nasty. Nah. No, no, the cholera water looked just as good as other water, and there were even people who swore by the Broad Street pump as the pump they went to. They even went out of the way of their district to go to that pump. You know, there wasn't a taste of the water that told them that it was poo-poo water. With what I mean, you know, uh, even if the poo's filtered out by the point it's becoming your drinking water, the Vibrio cholerae is from people's poo. It's a fecal to oral transmittable pathogen. So like, yeah, I just really, really, really want to stress the importance of epidemiology to people with the crisis we're in right now. I don't think people understand what RFK, more than anything in the Trump administration, I think for us just focus on health for a second, what RFK represents in science. Germ theory has been uncontested. I mean, they've tried, but they've failed for fucking centuries now. You can call it a plural. Well, actually, it's not quite that point yet. We're not the 60s, but you know, 100 and fucking what, 70 years, 160 years. We're just gonna like throw it all away now. The miasmists have taken over the US Health Administration. What does that mean for the CDC? What does that mean for Medicare, Medicaid? What does that mean for vaccine rollout and vaccine development? Like these are all really, really important questions that I don't see enough conversations going on. I do see some of it. Majority Report has done some stuff on this. I wish they do some more. You know, shout out to the Majority Report. We love them, but like, you know, this is you know, a real thing as well. You know, Vibrio cholera. We're looking at the 1850s here. This is a reality around the world. Now they don't face the traditional cholera strain. There was a new strain that formed in the seventh pandemic. Pandemic is like when a thing goes multi-country or worldwide. It's like the World War equivalent of a pathogen. Um, the seventh international pandemic involved a new strain. I don't know what the name of it is. But it's related to the 0139. I mean, that's an evolutionary dissident of the strain I'm thinking of. I can't remember the name of. But like outbreaks in India, outbreaks in fucking Africa, outbreaks in China, outbreaks in, and you know, some of these are just outbreaks. Some of these are endemic, you know, seasonal outbreaks that are just a consistent thing. Some of these are you know, epidemics, and then some of them are pandemics. We haven't hit a massive cholera pandemic again, I don't think, for a little bit, but we're not far off another burst. Cholera is not a dealt with problem, even though it could be. clean drinking water and proper sanitation is the way to deal with cholera. We wouldn't get poisoned by it if we weren't drinking water that had fecal matter in it or had been around fecal matter at some point or another. So there's like a really big important part of like what we're looking at and the clarifieds of where we're going as a society. Barbarism doesn't care for the smiley face of capitalism. So we got a miasmist in control. And America often influences what changes in the British. Is UKIP gonna come out with the same kind of crazies? Or is Labour gonna do it as a part of the appeasement of the United States? Are we gonna stop believing in miasma theory? I mean, we're already believing in all sorts of anti-trans pseudoscience as it is, with their quest to deny the existence of trans females and trans femmes, and trans femme non-binary people. You know, like uh, it's fascism is here. And it is very fucking brutal. And I think we need to take a bit more consideration for that brutality and what it's going to bring. And this brutal deception of London, this historical record is a glimpse to what we are going to see as things deteriorate and as the imperial core tries to re-coordinate itself, the Western one, with most of the Anglosphere in this regard, I guess I'm speaking to. It's going to try and rearrange itself to compete with the other empires, Britain and America, and all their little colonies that they both own. Those two are a partner, have been for a while, the Anglo-American deal. It's the reason why they conspired to do the war on terror. EU has its own direction. They seem to actually still be taking health seriously, but fascists all across the continent are looking to break the EU up. Well, I mean, what they wanted in EU back in the fucking 60s and the 70s. Can't make their minds up, on what they want. But like, yeah, that's the big thing we got coming is that there's this anti-science addiction, you could call it, almost like this. It's a craze, people want stuff to be devoid of science, devoid of evidence. See this with the rise of the Christian far right and just Christo-fascist points of view and perspective. It's where we are in the world, and it's fucking terrifying.
Since he lived in the area for a while, he knew that people didn't always go to the geographically closest water pump. This is when he noticed that a bunch of people in the outbreak area were getting water from the same pump on Broad Street. Also, not to nerd out too hard, but seeing the pump in person was a very cool moment for me, even if it is a replica. Next, he started looking for exceptions to his pattern. Like, there was a factory a few blocks away that had a high concentration of deaths, but was closer to another pump. Well, it turns out that the factory bosses gave their employees water from the Broad Street pump. And on the flip side, there was a brewery really close by that didn't have any cholera deaths.
Obviously the pump is there, but then the brewery would have been around there.
After interviewing the boss and employees, Snow learned that they had their own private water line, and everyone drank beer anyway. In a letter to the Medical Times and Gazette a few days later, Snow writes, "I found that nearly all the deaths had taken place within a short distance of the pump. There were only 10 deaths in houses situated decidedly nearer to another street pump. In 5 of these cases, the families of the deceased persons informed me that they had always sent to the pump in Broad Street, as they preferred the water to that of the pumps which were nearer. In 3 cases, the deceased were children who went to..."
Like people didn't know that they were drinking bad water by the taste or by the scent of it. They even preferred the taste of it to some people. That's like the craziness of shit like this. Like poor sanitation. Like I think a lot of fucking white people, we tend to forget how um we tend to forget how you know, easy it is to engage in poor sanitation. Like we're all like, oh, how could anyone ever drink that water? And it's like not only because you have to, but like from a certain perspective, bad water can just seem like water. Like it can just look the same as water. We've always had a penchant for knowing that like the water you get from like flowing rivers can often have things in it and we've been filtering water out for like eons. There isn't a human civilization that hasn't messed around with some kind of filtering. You know, it's just a big part of how we've interacted with water. But like even then, it's still dangerous, still full of microbes. But yum yum yum, tastes just as good as any other water. It's essentially no different. You know, it's like I like I don't know if you like Evian water instead of Volvic or something. It's that kind of argument, except let's pretend Volvic is full of Vibrio cholerae and Evian is full of E. coli just to make it spicy because we're not out of good option. No good options. Dysentery all around. I'm actually gonna go to the toilet though, so y'all gonna get the Hassan experience with the chair. I guess that was the ethical version of Hassan. I did not leave the video blank. I only went to the bathroom. The chair was not empty for too long, let me show you.
School near the pump in Broad Street. With regards to the deaths occurring in the locality belonging to the pump, there were 61 instances in which I was informed that the
Yeah, you gotta
deceased person
think like that. Like, you might not even live near the pump, but you walk past the pump on the way to school. If I was thirsty in those days, you know, I just go to the pump. It's a water pump. Surely it should just provide me water. Like, this is the mentality, you know? You're like a fucking 12-year-old or something. You just go drink that fucking water to salivate yourself. Say you've been smoking weed with the crew and things like that. You got bad dry mouth. You got bad dry mouth, you need to sumber some water and you go drink up some Vibrio cholerae and well, I mean, it's got like a 90 some percent mortality rate. Like, well, in those that get active pathogenic cholera, not all cholera activates in people's bowels. Often the E. coli and other bowel bacteria can actually outcompete the cholera, but that depends on how much cholera gets in, and it also depends on if they've had the toxin given to them by the bacteriophage. They don't have the cholera toxin, they are not going to win in the fight for the bowels. But if they have the cholera toxin, then they have a very, very powerful antibiotic that will obliterate your gut bacteria and everything else about your gut because it causes you to shit out your water basically. And you get what's known as rice water stool. And you die of dehydration by shitting out all of your water. It's full of cholera that's been breeding. And then it gets back in the water, gets in people's mouth again. So again, as the thing Jon Snow himself had coined, cholera is carried. Well, no, sorry, people carry cholera.
Persons used to drink the pump water from Broad Street, either constantly or occasionally. The result of the inquiry then.
Sorry, I should be clear on what that means. It basically means that like where cholera finds itself in an area, you can find an index case quite easily in the sense that people carry cholera. The 1831 epidemic that was brought over from the Caribbean, I think it was, from Cuba. And that caused it might not have been Cuba, but it was from the Caribbean, I do believe, because there was a lot of outbreaks going on there in the region. The British were already studying this. Some sailor used the latrine who'd been out in the colonies, and Vibrio cholerae gets in the water and spreads. And that's the way you can see it spread to any locale. We've even seen this today. The modern strain that emerged out of the seventh pandemic. You can look at stuff from 10 years ago where it's appearing in places that it wasn't years prior in Latin America and places like that. So like there's a wider discussion when we're talking about cholera that I do have another video for that's much more sciencey than science communicator. So like we might do the germ theory stuff and then we'll come back to cholera because I've gotten hooked into criticizing the miasmist stuff. We didn't even cover the miasma video. All depends how much time I got and how much my throat can take it. My voice isn't doing very well today. My voice always sounds awful. I don't know how y'all put up with me. Love y'all.
To drink the pump water from Broad Street, either constantly or occasionally. The result of the inquiry, then, is that there has been no particular outbreak or prevalence of cholera in this part of London except among the persons who were in the habit of drinking the water of the above-mentioned pump well. So at this point, it's Tuesday, September 5th, and the Board of Health started their own investigation into Golden Square. They formed a new committee called the Committee for Scientific Inquiries, or CSI, which is just perfect for disease detectives, and who's the lead? None other than my man, William Farr. But the CSI wasn't just a bunch of stats nerds. They had a chemist, a microscopist, and a meteorologist. And that last one seems weird until you remember that the entire board believed in the miasma theory, so a meteorologist was there to interpret if the weather might be influencing the miasmas that they thought spread cholera. And here's what's wild. They were able to test the air for germs in 1854. The chief chemist took a big tank, put it outside, and sucked in air. Then he distilled the water vapor and looked at that water under a microscope. And he found all kinds of stuff. Fungi, hair, and a few vibriones, which is what they called any long, wiggly microbe back then. The chemist repeated the trials in the empty ward of a hospital, then a full hospital ward, and a half-full hospital. Trials in the empty ward of a hospital.
I really want to read this book. This is I do believe this is Jon Snow's 1854. No, this is Farr's piece, isn't it? Yeah, sorry. This is Farr's report of the time 54. Um, this is the great thing about what's the part of the book where they show all the references? Is it the index? Um, I don't know. He mentions it in a bit, but like this is an artistic illustration of what they're seeing in the microscope.
Then a full hospital ward.
Look at these. That's like bacteria multiplied in these long things. I don't know if that's E. coli that's doing that. I think it is. I think it's E. coli.
And a half.
2p air. No, I don't want to mute it. I want to go back. Yeah, I think that's E. coli. I don't know what that is. Hmm, I don't know. There's always artistic liberty with a lot of this stuff. It's real Haeckel's drawing from do some of this shit. Not so much for microbes; they're a little harder to fuck up, but not as detailed as a fetus. But Haeckel's a complicated conversation, and he's a beast anyway. Um,
And a half full.
he is the founder of genetics, and that's real fucking cool. Oh no, no, I'm the hey, you want to see something cool? I just did that. No way. I've been poisoned by all the autism on the internet. Anyway,
Hospital ward.
sorry, I just nodding out so much at like all these imagery, like there's protozoa and all sorts going on, as well as bacteria doing their thing. Um, it's crazy to like that like they sat there and they drew out every incredible detail. You know, these aren't photographs; these are hand drawings of what they're seeing in the microscope using bright field microscopy, which is where you use like a condensate light. I mean, we use better lights nowadays, but back in them days, it would have been like a an oil lamp placed in underneath the microscopes, underneath the the sample that you're looking at in the petri dish, so that it's like presenting the light through the agar, um, onto the microbes and gives you this sort of like black to white perspective of the microbes. It actually does have a little more color than that, but that's more of a modern bright field microscopy. I don't think traditional microscopy had so much of a color component going in with it, by the ways in which I see it drawn. Don't know. Don't have a microscope, looking to get one. I fucking had any opportunity to become a microbiologist and stuff like that. There's many other things I'd like to have gone to uni for. Dead. Probably never gonna get a chance to go to uni. So I'd like to learn hands-on on my own regard because I think that we need to we need to be advocates for good science on germ theory. I do believe that that's an imperative in this current fight against fascism. They are trying to destroy one of the most important, no, the most important development in healthcare history. Germ theory is at the center of everything we do. Making bread, brewing beer, milk, pasteurization, fucking antiseptic hand sanitizers and antibiotics, a whole field of antiseptics. It's all a big part of preventing microbes from causing pathogenic responses inside your body, trying to kill you. Well, not necessarily whether they're trying to kill you or not, but killing you, harming you, putting your health at risk for that pathogen to take nest in your body. So, like, it's a really important thing that in a world that's degenerating, that we be hyper vigilant on these kind of issues, is we're gonna start seeing outbreaks, and they may even expand into epidemics. The poison and pollution of our rivers, of our towns and cities is immense. I mean, it's fucking why they had to brick up the fucking well to the spring that's linked up to our river because the fucking companies dumping sewage, dumping chemical wastes in the water. Ugh, it's deadly, and people let their dogs swim in it, and then they carry the pathogens home, and then it just takes it to go through the dog's body, fecal to oral route with the owner. You'd be surprised how much of your pet's shit ends up in your mouth. If any of yous want to have to think about that and deal with that, you're welcome. But it's an important point that these places, this disease spreading capacity, it's not limited to Ethan Klein and his Giardia, with him shitting all over his floor. I'm not even gonna blame the dog. It's him. I think people have got the conspiracies wrong. Ethan shit all over the floor, and that's why CPS had to be called. It's very, very important because Ethan was doing a Caleb Maupin and was just shitting everywhere. blaming the dog even, and then next thing you know, everyone in the house got Giardia, which naturally grows in Ethan's microbiome. He's naturally what's the called a reservoir for Giardia. Um, wait, what even is Giardia? A second. I can't remember what it is. Uh, God, no, I don't want to. Giardia is a microscopic parasite that causes diarrhea. I want to know what microbe it is. What the? This is why you don't use Bing. Ugh. I only use Edge because it's like not gonna dox me when I'm streaming. I always get a bit skittish with using my Firefox because it's got a lot of my shit going on with that. I need to get like a separate account and switch between the two instead, maybe. But yeah, it's just a little easier to just run it straight out of this, and then I can just like if my computer needs some more RAM, I can cut Firefox out, which has a lot of tabs open. We're not getting into that. Giardia. I want to know the parasite. I don't want to know Giardias. I want to know the parasite. What's the parasite? Tell me the parasite. What is it? Don't just tell me microbe parasite. What is it? I think it's protozoa, but I might be wrong. Yeah, it is protozoan. Okay. Giardia is a genus of anaerobic flagellated, which means they're multi-fire flagella, protozoan. And anaerobic means that they live in uh so like they don't require oxygen for growth, and there's some strict aerobes who will even die. Sorry, strict anaerobes who will even die if they just come into contact to a single molecule of oxygen. I think is it Clostridium tetani? That's like that. Yeah, yeah, Clostridium tetani. It's really hard. It's the thing that causes tetanus. It's not actually rust. It has nothing to do with rust. It's just rust often is a rusty nails are often an easy way to get that kind of dirt in you, which has those spores. And those spores are really just found in mud. Mud's where that comes from. It's where you gotta be really careful of dirt. So you don't use dirt to block wounds. You use soil to block wounds. Because that dirt is it's not sustaining those living Clostridium. It's sustaining those spores. They're in too much contact with the air, and then you get them in your wound, and then boom, they latch onto the where the clot's forming. They can actually even stop the wound from properly healing by doing this. And what they then do is start excreting their neurotoxins, and they try and spread into the nervous system. Uh, and they take control of the nervous system of their host essentially. Like they turn you into a song with a gaunty, crazy smile, but no, that's getting into the bacterium anaerobic type. Protozoa is a eukaryote, so they're more like us. So Giardia is a little more closely related to us than it is to bacteria. Um, it's now the question is like which Giardia does Ethan Klein have is always the big question. I imagine. Um, it's this one. So this is Giardia duodenalis. So is we're doing some epidemiology on Ethan Klein's need to shit all over his floor and then blame his baby and his dog. G. duodenalis is a non-invasive parasite that does not spread to other parts of the gastrointestinal tract but remains confined to the lumen of the small intestine. The parasite exists in two forms. trophozoites. Trophozoite is the activated feeding stage in the life cycle of a certain protozoa, such as malaria, causing plasmodium, falciparum. Yeah, funnily enough, there's another malaria plasmoda that's less common because it's well, I mean, it actually happens a lot, but it's not really virulent. Is called Plasmodium malariae. So, like, yeah, the mild form of malaria is the one that's called malaria. You can't make this shit up. Biology's always got a lot of holes you can puncture in it like that. It's kind of crazy. Oh, God. Chief pathways of human infection include Ethan Klein shitting everywhere. Sorry, you guys gotta shut on him, you know? Maybe you can fly all the way over and sue me for defamation. Ah, suing, like satire would be a funny thing to see, but yeah. Circumonas intestinalis lamblia intestinalis giardia lamblia giardia intestinalis. So like the synonyms. So yeah, these are accepted alternate names. If you didn't know it targeted the intestines, it lets you know. What does duodenalis mean anyway? Let's ask Copilot. The Latin word duodenalis translates to pertaining to the duodenum, which is the first section of the small intestine in anatomy. Okay, I mean, wow, that's duodenalis. That one's very specific nomenclature. My God, they're like, yeah, we found the Latin word for small intestinal tract. The first section of the small intestine. They're like, oh yeah, no, we're just like, yep, you know, the first section of the small intestine has Giardia. It's the most straightforward science name we've ever seen in Taxon. Thank you, Copilot. Now go fucking die. I want it. Chat. I want it die. I can't get... Why can't I get rid of Copilot? Is it because I haven't scrolled down? What the fuck is going on?
Put it outside and sucked in air. Then he distilled the water vapor and looked at that water under a microscope. And he found all kinds of stuff. Fungi, hair, and a few vibriones, which is what they called any long, wiggly microbe back then. The chemist repeated the trials in the empty ward of a hospital, then a full hospital ward, and a half-full hospital ward. Half empty if you're an optimist, I guess. He only found vibriones in the full ward, which seems like it supported miasma theory. But the chemist hedged his findings, saying it would be premature to infer a connection between the disease and these organisms until extensive comparative trials have been made on other conditions of air. Meanwhile, the microscopist went looking at water samples from the different water companies and got really similar data to snow. Lambeth water had way less stuff floating around it than S&V water. Also, archival work pro tip, always read the appendix. It's where they keep the good stuff like these drawings. The microscopist also got the pleasure of looking at the rice water stools under a microscope, including 2 samples, immediately after they were evacuated, which Had to be a rough day at the office. He saw Vibriones in every sample he looked at, which almost convinced him that the germ caused cholera, but he ultimately dismissed it. He thought the Vibriones liked the conditions of a cholera victim's intestines, but he didn't believe that they caused the illness. So at this point, both Snow and the Board of Health had interviewed the residents of Golden Square and had started writing their reports. But in the meantime, they still needed to figure out how to stop the outbreak. One of their main strategies was scattering chloride of lime on the streets, which would have countered the smells from the cholera miasmas. They actually did the same thing a few decades later for a plague outbreak in San Francisco, which I made a video all about and you can find right here. That Thursday night, September 7th, the local parish held a meeting about the cholera outbreak and Snow showed up with a pretty clear warning. The vast majority of the dead got their water from Broad Street. He didn't go on a tirade about miasma theory, he just stayed focused so he could make his recommendation, which was to remove the pump handle. The board wasn't immediately convinced, but they figured, things are really bad out there, what do we got to lose? So the next day, Friday, September 8th, the board shut down the pump and waited. The death toll in Soho was still high for the next week or so. It definitely wasn't the instant proof of concept described in the standard Jon Snow myth. But after a few days, it started to look like the worst of the epidemic was behind them. The truth is, nobody really thought about the pump handle at the time. Nobody, except for this guy, Henry Whitehead. He was a local priest and doctor in the Soho area, and he was pissed at Snow. This was Whitehead's turf, and the waterborne theory was stupid. He was team miasma all
There's like a bit of a story here that I could also like spin off of regarding like how we integrate with other workforce, because like what ends up happening is the community demand the need, and both Whitehead and um Snow end up working together, and through working together come to the same conclusion in the end. I mean, I'm breaking some of the story here, like before the guy's gonna go on about it, but like the big part of it is that like we could get into like food programs and stuff like that, like Christians often don't see through to our more radical ways, but if we can come together on providing food, shelter, and health as much as we possibly can for the people. Well, institutions like that are more known for generosity than the state of capitalism is. And so they're not a bad bet to go. When I was homeless, it was a church that gave me shelter and fed me the whole time. I probably ate better than I ever have in my life because of the church. I needed it. It was the winter. Um, we go to everywhere that was giving out free food, and we just get as much as we could. And then on the night at the night shelter, we'd have, if there was multiple plates of food to be eaten, we'd have multiple plates of food. They were happy to feed us. It was a beautiful show of love and empathy that I just I think some people take for granted, you know? Those people do have dedication in a lot of cases, so we can cross some differences when it specifically comes to certain aspects of how we manage the epidemiological needs of the people, as well as general food, shelter, uh, and toiletries and essentials and things like that, how we procure and provide them. So there's an intersection here with like, I mean, I'm kind of dragging it out a bit compared to what's actually going on here, but I just think it's an important point of conduct to understand that we're not this like singular iconoclast, and we've got to work within the community and break bread. Look, I'm sounding like Christian. Break bread with those who disagree with us a bit. Not the reactionaries. I just mean like working with, I mean, Christians do a lot of food projects, stuff like that. So like the Whitehead part of the story with Snow, there's something I'm dragging this out. Like it's not really exactly what I'm saying in the future is what's happening here. I just thought it's a really good point of reason in regards to the collaborative efforts of science and how we commit and commute and communicate science. Again, this story is just a very big, pungent, representation of the importance of healthy science communication. And we're going to see that with the way um, the infamous map that that was drawn by um, Jon Snow.
All day. He even wrote his own report of the outbreak, which has some of the miasmatists' greatest hits. Like he said, the atmosphere all over the world is at the time favorable to the production of a most formidable plague, probably referring to all the air pollution. He didn't make a case against Snow's waterborne theory, but he publishes this thing and it gets pretty widely read in the community. A few months go by, the epidemic fades, and in November, the local parish vestry put together yet another committee to investigate the outbreak. That's 4 reports now. So the vestry thought, great, the Board of Health already has all this data, we can learn a lot from it. But the board says no. The vestry should go do their own independent investigation. So the residents turned to their local hero doctors and invited Jon Snow and Henry Whitehead onto the committee to work together. See what I mean about the real story being so much more interesting? These dudes hated each other and now they had to work together in order to help their community, and it never gets told in the actual story. Whitehead went into the process believing that if he could document how people survived drinking Broad Street pump water, then Snow's theory would fall apart. But almost all of his interviewees had some kind of connection to Broad Street. About 60% of Broad Street drinkers got sick, while only 10% of non-Broad Street drinkers got sick. Whitehead started doubting his original hypothesis, but he couldn't get his head around the idea that the Board of Health could look at the water under a microscope, see it was clean, and it could still cause disease. And that's where Snow comes back in. Snow clarified that he didn't blame cholera on the general cleanliness of water, but whether or not it was contaminated.
I think I do see, actually I might be wrong, but like I think that might be one lonely piece of cholera there. So clean. I mean, one cholera getting you don't want to be much, but so there's one lone cholera, which is unusual. Cholera is a colonial bacteria, you know.
And it could still cause disease. And that's where Snow comes back in.
Most bacteria are colonial.
Snow clarified that he didn't blame cholera on the general cleanliness of water, but whether or not it was contaminated by stool from a cholera victim. Whitehead said, all right, let's check the pipes around the pump. Maybe there's some stool leaking in somehow. But that was a dead end. A sewer engineer named Edmund Cooper had just recently inspected all the pipes in the neighborhood and said that everything was okay. He was responding to rumors that recent construction had disturbed an ancient plague burial pit that was releasing miasma up to the surface, which caused the cholera. Cooper looked into all the gutters and possible venting areas and concluded that there was no connection between leaky gutters and deaths, which of course absolves him and his department of any more work. He also found no link between any of the local sewers and the Broad Street pump. So Whitehead pivoted. He went digging through the cholera data, looking for whose death might have been the very first case that kicked off the epidemic, what's called the index case. Given the time frame of cholera, he figured that the contamination must have happened sometime around August 28th. So he read through FAR's weekly returns and only found 2 nearby cholera deaths that fit the bill, both of which happened pretty far away from Broad Street, so neither of those was the likely index case. For weeks, Whitehead was stuck. At this point, he had memorized the publicly available weekly returns and moved on to primary records at the Registrar General's office. And that's when he saw the breakthrough clue. On September 2nd, a 5-month-old baby girl died at 40 Broad Street, literally right next to the pump. According to the records, the baby had been suffering from diarrhea since August 29th. Cholera can kill adults in a matter of hours after the onset of symptoms, so it made sense that the baby's death was attributed to the milder diarrhea instead of cholera. But it was possible that the baby had been misdiagnosed. Whitehead immediately ran off to 40 Broad Street to interview the baby's mother. The mom said that they had washed the baby's used diapers and dumped some of the wastewater into a cesspit in front of their house. So Whitehead got permission to dig up the sewage system under the house and around the pump and found that the drain's bricks had decayed to the point where it was leaking into the pump's water supply. Everything finally lined up. The disease, the timing, the infrastructure evidence. So Whitehead tells Snow what he found, and they started writing their report for the local
paper leaking into the water supply. Because like there was other things that caused the other epidemics, but this is referring to the 54 massive soaring case. And they're saying in like 1853, the index case come from a baby, and then that poisoned the water supply through just leaky bricks. That's crazy when you're really like, you're already past the deadliness of cholera. Because when you shit cholera, you're shitting millions, if not billions, of vibriones Wiggly microbes. The vibriones that come out in your pooty as you shit out that wastewater store.
Parish vestry in early
Yes, I
1855.
do the
At this
worst.
point,
Fuck off.
they weren't just tolerating each other, they were close friends. This was the moment Snow had been waiting for. Not the friendship, the science. He had solid evidence to back up his waterborne transmission hypothesis and an audience ready to listen to him. Now he just had to make a convincing argument. And to do that, he decided to draw a map. The map, the famous one. And this is my biggest complaint with the standard Jon Snow myth. The map didn't lead him to an idea. Needing to communicate his idea led him to make a map. The map wasn't new data, it was science communication. See, in 1849, a doctor named Thomas Shapter drew a map as part of his report on Exeter's 1832 cholera outbreak. This showed Snow that a map could be a powerful data visualization tool, and this report was likely the inspiration for the Broad Street map. What made Snow's map so convincing was its simplicity. It didn't show anything except for streets, pump locations, and deaths represented by thick tally marks. No plague pits, no sewer lines, or elevation. He purposely only shows what he wants to show, which leads the viewer to associate the deaths with the pump. Snow presented his map to the vestry committee after Whitehead had found the index case, and when everything was taken together, it worked. The local parish endorsed the waterborne hypothesis. This was a huge win for Snow. But he still wasn't happy with his argument. A miasmatist could still read the map and conclude that the miasmas were coming from the Broad Street pump. And it's easy to see why. When you look at the original map, you see the death's relationship to the pump as the crow flies, but that doesn't reflect which pumps people actually got their water from. So, Snow revised the map and added something called a Voronoi diagram. Basically, he added a dotted line to show the area in which the Broad Street pump was the closest pump in walking distance. This meant he had to walk through the little side streets and alleys to the closest pump. Again, another great science communication choice. It clearly showed how most of the cholera victims got their water from the Broad.
So this is why, like, I wanted to talk about this, is that there's that, like, in-depth street science work that communists are supposed to be representative of, you know? His door-to-door interviews was a good example of that, but this is even better one, like, similar to, like, Engels trail in the back streets of Manchester with his girlfriend, learning about the brutalities of the working class existence in industrial Britain from a hands-on perspective. And you know, as someone of an outsider, Snow was exploring places he even knew. I mean, Soho is his stomping grounds, but like just putting all the in-depth effort to trail the streets, to trail the back streets and all that. If you know anything about Victorian towns and cities, is they got a lot of like back alleyways and things like that, little crossways, shortcuts, and also not so shorty cuts. So like it's making sure that you're mapping out the whole area and how these things work. This is a big and important part of epidemiology that we take for granted in the Imperial Core. The CDC solves it. Well, maybe not so much anymore now that their leader believes in miasma theory. Oh, well, the guy who leads the health, the HHS, is a fucking, um, is a miasmatist. So, like, it's important that we really consider the essential efforts of epidemiology when it comes to doing revolutionary work, especially for Americans right now. Y'all need to start knowing what the fuck is in the water, what the fuck is in milk, what the fuck is in this and that, because you should already know it anyway, but now it's critical. Germ theory is under attack. I am not being a fucking alarmist when I say one of the most important theory of medical biology is being torn apart by the U.S. direction in health and human services. Um, the what's it? It leaves me speechless. Like we are really entering a dark time. The anti-vaxxers are winning. The miasmatists are winning. The Christian fundamentalists are winning. Anti-science is winning. It's like this really should be something people are sounding the alarm about more. But instead we are treated to a somber silence telling from a lot of people. Again, no, like people on Majority Report and people like that have spoken out about these kind of things. Always a good channel to go to, for information. But I just like I don't think there's enough deep retrospectives from a scientific background breaking down um, what this threat represents, because I think a lot of people, they hear my asthma test and they just think it's a joke and they pass it off. Oh, funny, what a stupid thing to believe. Yeah, it is. And the fucking guy who runs the health services believes in it and he's enforcing it. So like, you know, we gotta really think about the fact that these things we take for granted. The idea of miasma is a stupid idea to a lot of people today across the globe. It's hard to find people who, once you teach them germ theory, are gonna go, yeah, actually, I'm gonna believe miasma theory. But there are some, and with the power of institutions, with the power of white man confidence, they can push this shit. It's they're gonna sabotage pasteurization. They're gonna sabotage uh, um so much about public health. Your beer will be full of fucking microbes that could put you in hospital. Your milk will be full of microbes that can put you in hospital. Uh, your clothes you buy might be laced with fleas. Maybe they won't put any due diligence in dealing with anything. You know, Again, prairie dogs in America are actually a reservoir for Yersinia pestis. So America could even have a plague outbreak instead of just the minor case here and there. When you destroy population health, when you crash epidemiology, you open the door for even things that people tend to, again, take for granted. As some of this been and gone. Yersinia pestis, thing of the past. We dealt with the plague. The plague is gone. It's not. It's very real for a lot of the world, and it's very real for some Americans too. The prairie dog is a natural reservoir for Yersinia pestis. Um, so like there's a whole lot of shit more than just Vibrio cholerae to be worried about when it comes to unsanitary water. Like this is without even getting into the worms. Like bacteria are very, very scary because they're very hard to see. Worms, nematodes. I mean, you can often see these guys. They're the ones that like to take over your intestines and stuff like that, or sometimes just live in any part of your body that you want to take host in. Some may even say that they can even take host in your brain. I'm sure RFK would have nothing to understand about that because the worm ate the part of his brain that could understand it. Um, but like, yeah, the oh God, so much shit going on with America and what it's done to society worldwide, like what it represents for fascism in Europe moving forward. Um, I mean, oh God, we haven't even got UKIP in power yet, or whatever the fuck, Reform. It's always a new brand. Reform and power yet. We're dealing with Labour, who are just being more fascist than the Conservatives for some reason. They've got it hellbent. They want to fucking fight against trans people, possibly have a nuclear war with Iran. That guy who's in charge of the Ministry of Defense was at one point going on about how willing he would be to like nuke another country or some of another. It's kind of crazy. But like, yeah, the Labour Party is already curtailing to Trump's fascism and constantly dogging up to it. So it's feasible that RFK's influence could affect us as time goes by.
Science communication choice. It clearly showed how most of the cholera victims got their water from the Broad Street pump. The final piece of the battle was convincing the staunchly miasmatist Board of Health that the disease was waterborne. Part of that was pointing out how the evidence didn't support Farr's elevation hypothesis. And ultimately, they conceded a little bit. In the appendix, they say, Dr. Snow, in a paper dated August 29, 1849, advanced a theory of the pathology of cholera, and it is in any respects the most important theory that has yet been propounded. Snow published a second edition of On the Mode of Communication of Cholera.
Again, he determined that a microorganism caused pathogenic reactions in the body before germ theory was theorized. You could argue this is almost like an early germ theory, as to what Snow proposed, or organic components of what would become germ theory as we go forward.
That has yet been propounded. Snow published a second edition of On the Mode of Communication of Cholera, this time writing a full book instead of a little pamphlet. But still, the paradigm hadn't fully shifted yet. This was great evidence against miasma theory, but it didn't start a revolution. By the 1860s, Chadwick's big plans for a new sewer system finally became a reality after hiring engineer Joseph Bazalgette. It was an enormous project on par with the Eiffel Tower. At this point, William Farr had ditched the elevation hypothesis and was on vacation. After hiring
Look at it. Oh yes, right. We're building a poo line. Yes, this is a poo line. This is where the poo will get taken out of the city. Yeah. I don't think we have sewers that big in this town. I think the sewers are a little smaller here. You could walk down those. I don't think you can walk down the ones in my town.
Engineer Joseph Bazalgette. It was an enormous project on par with the Eiffel Tower. At this point, William Farr had ditched the elevation hypothesis and was on Team Waterborne. So when cholera came back in 1866, he knew to look to the water supply. And early data seemed to show more cholera deaths in the neighborhood supplied by the East London Waterworks Company. So he warned people near the outbreak to avoid water that hadn't been boiled and started an investigation. It turned out that the water company hadn't complied with Chadwick's instructions for the sewage update and were still illegally pumping in water from an old contaminated water source. Farr called them out, they changed their intake point, and mortality rates in their district dropped soon afterwards. It was the last cholera epidemic that London would ever have. In his 1867 report, Farr gave quite a bit of posthumous credit to Snow. His work had turned the current in the direction of water, and tended to divert attention from the atmospheric doctrine, talking about miasma. He wasn't ready to let go of miasma theory completely, but he acknowledged that waterborne transmission explained the vast majority of cholera cases. Part of what
Okay, yeah, no, I was just looking this up to be certain. Yeah, the reason why Snow's out of the picture is Jon Snow actually didn't live very long. He died in 1858. He was born in 1813. Guy did not live very long. Killed him then. Known for anesthesia, locating the source of a cholera outbreak, thus establishing the disease as waterborne. Anesthesia epidemiology is his fields. Why did he die? He's from York. He's a northerner. Let's go. Yo. His father was a laborer who worked on a local coal yard. Mendham's a working class hero. Let's go. Yeah. I already left the guy. I didn't know this. Yeah, no, they grew up in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city of York. Um, yeah, no, Snow experienced a lot of unsanitary experiences growing up. So, like, a big part of this, so crowds a lot of what ends up becoming, you know, his field. The guy died at 45. From a young age, Snow demonstrated an aptitude for mathematics. In 1927, when he was 14, he obtained a medical apprenticeship with William Hardcastle in the area of Newcastle upon Tyne. That's the good Newcastle. We do not speak of underline. But in 1832, during his time as a surgeon apothecary apprentice, he encountered a cholera epidemic for the first time in Killingworth. What's Killingworth? North Tyneside, a coal mining village. Snow treated many victims of the disease and thus gained experience. Eventually, he adjusted to Teetotalism is the practice of voluntarily abstaining from the consumption of alcoholism, um, and led a life characterized by abstinence, signing an abstinence pledge in 1835. The temperance movement is a social movement promoting temperance or total abstinence from consumption of alcoholic beverages. Okay, I didn't know you actually signed a pledge for that. Yeah, I mean, alcohol is poison anyway. Snow was also a vegetarian and tried to only drink distilled water that was pure, quote unquote. So guy was big on distillation, and he's a vegan. Like fucking no way. Like man them's like iconic working class hero. Like holy shit. Like you can't even make this stuff up. Like my god. The more I read is the more I get to love. Between 1832 and 1835, Snow worked as an assistant to a colliery surgeon. um what do they deal with? Coal mining is the process. Okay, so what's a colliery then? Why is it just taking me to coal mining? Is it just being a coal mine surgeon? Is colliery just a fancy way to say coal mine? Collieries of the British Isles. Yeah, it is. Okay. Oh, that doesn't look good. Lots of coal mines. Lots of coal mines. Okay. Okay, so colliery surgeon. First in Burnopfield, County. It's in Durham. Um, we do love Durham. County Durham. And then in Pateley Bridge, West Riding of Yorkshire. In October 1836, he enrolled at the Hunterian School of Medicine on Great Windmill Street, London. I guess that's how he got dragged into London livelihood. In the 1830s, Snow's colleague of the Newcastle infirmary surgeon was Thomas Michael Greenham. The surgeons worked together conducting research on England's cholera epidemics, both continuing to do so for many years. Um, he graduated from the university in December 1844 and was admitted to the Royal College of Physicians in 1850. Snow was a founding member of the Epidemiological Society, which was formed in May 1850 in a response to the cholera outbreak of 1849. By 1856, Snow and Greenhow's nephew, Dr. E.H. Greenhow, was some of a handful of esteemed medical men of the society who held discussions on this dreadful scourge, the cholera. Um, After finishing his medical studies in the University of London, he earned his MD in 1844. I'm really interested in how much cholera comes up in this. On 1941, he wrote on asphyxiation and the resuscitation of stillborn children, which is an article that discusses his discoveries on the physiology of neonatal respiration, oxygen consumption, and the effects of body temperature change. In 1857, Snow made an early and often overlooked contribution to epidemiology in a pamphlet on the adulteration of bread as a cause of rickets. Rickets is a condition that results in weak soft bones in children and may have either dietary deficiency or genetic causes. Okay, we're not here for his anesthesiology, though I imagine some of it relates to cholera. Yeah, he's a big, big pusher of chloroform. Um, but yeah, evolutionary in the field of aesthetics, obstetric anesthesia. Yeah, he was a big guy on the practice of childbirth as well. There we go, cholera. Snow was a skeptic of the then dominant miasma theory that stated that diseases such as cholera and bubonic plague were caused by pollution of noxious form of bad air. The germ theory of disease had not yet been developed, so Snow did not understand the mechanism by which the disease was transmitted. His observations of the evidence led him to discount the theory of foul air. He first published his theory in an 1849 essay on the mode of the communication of cholera, followed by a more detailed treatise um, in treatise in 1855, incorporating the results of his investigation of the role of the water supply in the Soho epidemic of 1854. By talking to local residents with help of Henry Whitehead, he identified the source of the outbreak as the public water pump on Broad Street, now Broadwick Street. Although Snow's chemical and microscope examination of a water sample from the Broad Street pump did not conclusively prove its danger, his studies of the pattern of disease were convincing enough to persuade the local council to disable um, the well pump by removing its handle force rod. This action has been commonly credited as ending the outbreak, but Snow observed that the epidemic may have already been in rapid decline. Quote, there is no doubt that the mortality was much diminished, as I said before, by the flight of the population which commenced soon after the outbreak, but the attacks had so far diminished before the use of the water was stopped that it is impossible to decide whether the well still contained the cholera poison in an active state or whether from some cause the water had become free from it. I mean, it's actually because cholera is seasonal, so it dissipates at a certain point in time. Um, Snow later used a dot map to illustrate the cluster of cholera cases around the pump. He also used statistics, as we know this from the video. Snow wrote, on proceeding to the spot, I found that nearly all the deaths had taken place within a short distance of the Broad Street pump. There were only 10 deaths in houses situated nearer to another street pump. In 5 of these cases, we've heard this, but in regards to the deaths occurring in the locality belonging to the pump, there were 61 instances in which I was informed that the deceased persons used to drink the pump from the water from Broad Street either constantly or occasionally. The result of the inquiry, then, is that there has been no particular outbreak or prevalence of cholera in this part of London except among the persons who are in the habit of drinking the water of the above mentioned pump well. I had an interview with the board of the Guardians of St. James Parish on the evening of the 7th of September. Um, and represented the above circumstances to them. In consequence of what I said, the handle of the pump was removed on the following day. You see, it's September. Cholera tends to outbreak in the summer. So like September is where I mean, it's more active in tropical regions where you can have a year-long assault on people, but even then, with a lot of places, it's endemic too. It's seasonal. So that's probably why there was the drop off. And as he said, it's like whether the cholera is still there or not is hard to say. He was right that the cholera was still there. And that removing the pump handle was the right thing to do. It's just an interesting point of consideration that he's not quite sure of what he's found. He's not quite sure of germs as a pathogenic source of disease, but he's almost there. It's an interesting thing. After the cholera epidemic had subsided, government officials replaced the Broad Street pump handle. They had responded only to the urgent threat posed to the population, and afterward they rejected Snow's theory. To accept his proposal would have meant indirectly accepting the fecal oral route of disease transmission, which was too unpleasant for most of the public to contemplate. It was not until 1866 that William Farr, one of Snow's chief opponents, realized the validity of his diagnosis when investigating another outbreak of cholera at Bromley by Bow and issued immediate orders that unboiled water was not to be drunk. Farr denied Snow's explanation of how exactly the contaminated water spread cholera, although he did not accept that the water. Although he did accept that the water had a role in the spread of the illness, in fact, some of the statistical data that Farr collected helped promote John Snow's views. Public health officials recognize the political struggles in which reformers have often become entangled. During the annual pump handle lecture in England, members of the John Snow Society remove and replace a pump handle to symbolize the continuing challenges for public health. I don't know that they did like a pump handle lecture. When did they meet? That'd be an interesting thing to see. Bundle lecture was established in 1993. So, like, when do they meet? Like, like, when do they do this celebration? Oh, there's been some, like, in 2003, Epidemics in the 21st Century, The Lessons of Czar from, like, Graham from Ireland. Um, that's a good statement, from, Chris Barlett. For what his speech was about, removing the pump handle at an international level. That's what I'm like echoing the needs for as well, like more than just my microcosm of the importance of science communication. Um, they're not telling me when these people meet to do these lectures though. Like when is it? Like, we're on an investigation chat. I'm gonna find out the pump handle lecture. September. Okay, that makes sense. Oh, that's this month. My birth month. You. Also a bit too doxy, I guess, but oh well. Yep. To celebrate the removal of the Broad Street pump handle that took place in September of 1854 during the cholera epidemic in Soho, London. That would be a cool thing to check out and see. Yeah. So like, is it Really? It won't tell me when there's a 2025 one. Is this just a Bing thing again? Wait, what? It was scheduled for June the 12th? But then why is it not on the Wikipedia? Okay, so it gave me a false date. What the? Oh my God. AI is so hallucinatory. They have not announced it yet. I want to go to this. Okay, so they haven't produced the broadsheet for it yet. Because that'd be a really cool thing to like live stream or something, you know? Snow is known to swim as a hobby for exercise. He became a vegetarian at the age of 17 and was a teetotaler. He embraced a lacto-ovo vegetarian uh, um, diet by supplementing his vegetables with dairy products and eggs for 8 years. Whilst in his 30s, he became a vegan. Um, his health deteriorated and he suffered a renal disorder, which is a kidney disorder, which he attributed to his vegan diet, and so he picked up meat eating and drinking wine. He continued drinking pure water via boiling throughout his adult life. He never married. Um, in 1830, Snow became a member of the temperance movement. In 1845, he became a member of the York Temperance Society. After his health declined, it was only about 1845 that he consumed a little wine to aid digestion. Snow lived, what? So Snow suffered a stroke while working in his London office on 10th of June, 1858. He was 45 years old at the time. He never recovered, dying 6 days later on June the 16th, 1858. He was buried in Brompton Cemetery, which is in London. It has been speculated that his premature death may have been related to his frequent exposure and experimentation with anesthetic gases, which is now known to have numerous adverse health effects. Snow administered and experiments with either chloroform, ethyl nitrate, carbon disulfide, benzene, bromoform. Oh my gosh. Ethyl bromide. Oh my god. Fucking dichloroethane during his lifetime. My god. Again, dichloroethane. Ethyl bromide. Do people know what bromium is like? Bromium is a chemical that wants to kill. Like, oh my. No, it was a blessing though. It was a good sidetrack to learn that um what's it? Um what's it? Jon Snow's a proletarian hero in many ways. Guy comes from a working class background. Um yeah. Founding father of epidemiology in 1854, his research linked deaths to the water pump near the site and thus determined that cholera is a waterborne disease. I mean, he determined it in 1848. A bit of mistelling there, but yeah, that was a beautiful little sidetrack. Um,
Led him to change his mind was that the world of science was changing around him. A scientist in France was starting to get the idea that maybe those microscopic organisms could cause disease. This would become known as germ theory. Check out this video if you want that part of the story.
I guess we might as well cover germ theory because it's tied into what I've been ranting about. Oh, God.
If there's one idea that makes modern medicine modern, it's germ theory. The idea that specific pathogens like bacteria or viruses can cause specific diseases. Antibiotics, vaccines, mosquito nets, they're all applications of germ theory. As someone who makes videos about medical history, I spend a lot of time reading about germ theory. But before this video, I'd never done a proper deep dive into its history. I knew Louis Pasteur was involved and that his experiments on spontaneous generation led to pasteurization. I was also familiar with the work of Robert Koch, who discovered the causative germs of anthrax and tuberculosis. And I knew these two had personal beef, so I was looking forward to reading about an old school scientific feud. But telling that story would still just be your classic great man history, and those aren't the most exciting stories for me. Like, germ theory brought us from bloodletting and mercury injections to antibiotics in less than 100 years. Now that's a story I'm interested in. So I had a few research questions for this video. What did Pasteur and Koch...
Like, I'm stipulating that there's a big thing about the progress that this has made and the way fascism is trying to rot the core of that progress away from us. Devastatingly so.
Actually do? What kind of pushback did germ theory have to overcome? And how does germ theory hold up to scrutiny in modern day? To answer those questions, we need to understand how people thought about disease in the year 1800. Because your average non-doctor believed in some variation of contagion theory, this idea that disease could spread from person to person. Scholars like Claudius Galen in ancient Rome and Girolamo Fracastoro in 16th century Italy wrote about this a bunch. They thought disease passed from person to person through little seeds, or what they called semina. But in reality, people didn't really care what old academics thought. Contagion just made sense. Like, if your roommate got tuberculosis, you'd probably start to worry that you'd catch tuberculosis too. It was scientists that were harder to convince. They accepted that some diseases like syphilis or rabies were contagious, but epidemic diseases like cholera or bubonic plague or leprosy were more questionable. Like, someone could get the plague who'd never met another plague victim. So scientists were more likely to believe in traditional miasma theory, the idea that bad air caused disease. I got a video all about its history if you want to check it out. But by the mid-1800s, there was a bunch of evidence saying that miasma theory didn't really work, but scientists didn't have anything better to replace it with. They still had no better way of explaining how disease could move over a large distance or how it could infect a lot of separate people at the same time. Plus, contagionists still didn't know what the contagious thing was. It could have been a poison that putrefied in the body, or it could have been an animalcule that you could see under a microscope. There was also this new model called zymotic theory. This idea said that disease came from little things called zymes that were even smaller than cells.
Oh god, I remember on the right thing when I gotta pause it. This is actually a thing that I believe RFK also believes in as a part of his miasma thing. I think that RFK knows enough about this topic from his own selfish interests in the field, not from him actually being a very intelligent man on the issue. It's just he's got an actual virulent drive against science, and I believe he actually subscribes to this theory. Personal belief, but like a lot of the stuff that uh he says speaks to the kind of apologia for uh um Dubay, I think his name is Dubois. He'll come up in a bit, but like RFK is trying to envision himself as a follower of that ilk of standing against the titan of germ theory to the end. Louis Pasteur be damned. I mean, he's so against Pasteur. I doubt it's like so unconsciously stupid like a lot of people will treat fascism. It's much more complex than this than people tend to consider. But yeah, let's go.
This idea said that disease came from little things called zymes that were even smaller than cells and under the right circumstances morphed into bacteria. Nobody had great evidence for any of their theories, but by the 1830s, things were starting to change that would make gathering that evidence much easier. The first was that doctors were finally starting to shift away from the old school humoral theory of disease. So instead of thinking about illness as an imbalance of the four bodily humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, they started looking for issues in individual pieces of anatomy. And to do that, they did autopsies. They'd record someone's signs and symptoms when they were alive, diagnose them with whatever disease, and then when they died, they cut them open and looked for any patterns in the anatomy. Like, if a patient had breathing issues when they were alive, then doctors would look for anything weird in the lungs on autopsy. This became known as the field of pathology, and it pushed doctors to go back to basics and ask, what is and where is disease? I got a video all about that one too. The second big thing was cell theory. By 1837, two scientists published their papers on this new idea that every living thing was made up of cells. One of them even helped discover that yeast, like the ones involved in fermentation, were living microbes themselves. And when combined with the new field of pathology, cell theory prompted doctors to start looking for problems at the cellular level, what's called cellular pathology. So to summarize, we understood disease as a problem with individual body parts, we had the technology to look at that body part in great detail, and oh, by the way, everything you see under the microscope is alive. It's no wonder scientists were obsessed with microbes at this moment in history. One of those scientists who thought up of cell theory, Theodor Schwann, was lab mates with an anatomist named Jacob Henle, who anatomy students might recognize from the loop of Henle in the kidney. And fun fact, they were also roommates.
I'm gonna God, they were roommates.
Henle eventually branched out from anatomy and started thinking about disease transmission. And in 1840, Henle came out with an essay where he asked how it was possible that lots of people in the same area could get sick with the same thing. Henle thought that some diseases were spread by miasmas, some were contagious, and some were a hybrid miasmatic contagious. But he thought that scientists had been missing a nuanced distinction throughout the years, that those seeds of disease that Galen and Fracastoro talked about weren't miniature versions of disease, they were microscopic living things that caused disease. Likewise, bad air didn't cause disease, but air could carry things that caused disease. Unfortunately, Henle thought it would be impossible to prove. He wrote, "Showing germs really are the effective cause could only then be empirically proven if one were able to isolate both the germs and fluids of animalcula and the organisms and fluids of contagia and then observe the effect of each of these separately, an experiment we will probably have to do without." Then he proposed 3 rules, or postulates, that a microbe needed to meet in order to qualify as the cause of a disease. The microorganism had to consistently be found in bodies suffering from the disease. The microbe needed to be isolated, then when that microbe was put inside a new healthy host, it had to produce the same disease. It was a sound idea, but there were some issues with the execution. Like, if you wanted to study tuberculosis in mice, you'd take some mice with TB, let them get sick and die, look for some kind of infected looking material in their bodies, then put that material into healthy mice hoping that they develop TB. Then when that batch of newly infected mice died, you should be able to pull the tuberculosis germ out of them too. But the mice didn't always die, which made confirming that last step really tricky. So Henle was stuck. Luckily, one of his students would come up with a solution. But I want to build some suspense. So to recap, by the mid-1800s, the mainstream scientific thought was all over the place. It was a combination of miasma theory, zymotic theory, and contagionism for certain diseases. And that's where Louis Pasteur comes in. Pasteur grew up in the French winemaking region of Arbois, and wasn't a particularly great student growing up. He eventually earns a science degree, then gets a job as a physics professor before becoming a graduate assistant in a chemistry department. And that's where he gets his first bit of notoriety. Pasteur's breakout discovery was the observation that some crystals had distinct mirror opposite shapes of themselves, a phenomenon called chirality, and it's a big deal in modern chemistry. After that discovery, Pasteur started getting a little bit more respect for his research, so he spent the next decade studying crystals. Then in 1854, Pasteur got a job at the university, so he spent the next
Chirality is an interesting thing to mention when we're talking about all the pseudoscience and people spinning up stuff. There's people that I don't know if it's because of their opposition to germ theory that they know about stuff like this, or it's just because of the kind of shit that they get pushed about. I think it's the latter. They know they know this chirality thing, which was Pasteur's discovery. They try that to disease in some ways. I've seen like chirality be like a mentioned thing for all sorts of stupid pseudoscience the Christians trying to push. I've seen it for like creationist arguments too. So like the, there's microcosms of things that aren't even the topic I'm trying to get into that hide in between this stuff. Like fucking like the hidden fecal, it's like the hidden fecal matter of a cholera infested water.
decade studying crystals. Then in 1854, Pasteur got a job at the University of Lille where he started studying the process of fermentation. Because for as long as humans have been drinking fermented beverages and eating fermented food, we didn't know how fermentation worked yet. Some scientists thought it was entirely a chemical process, while others thought it was more of a biological thing. By the late 1700s, a few scientists noticed that yeast cells tended to show up in fermented foods and alcohols, making it seem more like a biological thing. And like I mentioned in the miasma video, scientists couldn't ignore how similar fermentation was to putrefaction, the process of bloating and rotting that happens to a corpse after it dies. Pasteur was a chemistry guy, so at first he thought fermentation was mostly chemical, but after looking at a bunch of fermented alcohols under a microscope, he saw microscopic critters everywhere, which changed his mind and made him think it was a biological thing. Pasteur published a paper in 1857 showing that milk spoiled because microscopic yeast fermented the sugars in the milk into lactic acid. And in 1858, he proposed that yeast...
How did I get that? It's lactic acid. He says yeast, but I'm pretty sure it's actually the bacterium that produces the lactic acid. Listeria, I think that's like just one of those things of new field, new names to things. I don't know if the term bacteria hadn't even been coined yet. I don't think that was coined until Well, I won't spoil it. He comes in soon.
Processed sugar into alcohol. He still didn't have a super strong understanding of how it worked biochemically, but he saw so many microbes in the sour milk and alcoholic beverages that he figured they had to be responsible for fermentation. Like I said, plenty of other scientists had proposed that fermentation was a biological process, so Pasteur's research wasn't groundbreaking. But it did make Pasteur wonder whether fermentation was involved in disease, too. But before he could tackle that question, he'd need to deal with some very public drama. This is Antoine Béchat, a French scientist who had a big problem with Pasteur. See, Béchat published a similar hypothesis on fermentation in 1855, 2 years before Pasteur's paper, but he interpreted the results through the lens of zymotic theory. Béchat studied how cane sugar turned into glucose and fructose in water, and claimed that they broke apart thanks to a substance called zymase, which would have made fermentation more of a chemical process than a biological process. But after Pasteur became a celebrity with his first paper, Béchat started saying that he forgot to mention there was a mold growing in one of his solutions, which meant that he had shown fermentation was a biological phenomena before Pasteur did. And oh, by the way, Pasteur had actually stolen his idea. Pasteur responded by calling out the timeline. You can't go back in time and tweak your conclusions to fit new evidence. This was the first time of many that these two had beef throughout their careers. Whenever Pasteur got attention for a discovery, Béchat was there to try and debunk him. Pasteur moved on from fermentation and started studying the phenomenon of spontaneous generation, a super old idea that living things come from non-living things. This is when he did the experiment you probably learned about in middle school science class. In 1860, Pasteur had these special flasks made and filled them with a broth that was really good at growing bacteria. After heating them to kill off any existing bacteria, he either left them open and exposed to air, or closed off, which prevented air from getting inside. At the end of the experiment, the closed containers didn't have any bacterial growth, while the flasks exposed to air had plenty. Since bacteria didn't in fact grow in the closed containers, he concluded that spontaneous generation wasn't really a thing. Something from the air must have gotten in the open flask and contaminated it. Just like his work on fermentation, this experiment wasn't totally original either. An Italian scientist named Francesco Redi did something similar with meat and jars back in the 1600s. The difference was the scientific environment around each scientist. Redi's experiment was the first of its kind, and he didn't really know how to explain his observations. But by the time Pasteur did it, scientists were more familiar with microbes and open to debunking this ancient idea of spontaneous generation. This experiment wasn't important because it was the first one. It was important because Pasteur got people to listen to him, and because it led to a very cool application. He noticed that when microorganisms grew too much in beer or wine, the drink would spoil. So he came up with a technique for killing off those bacteria that involved heating up the beverage to somewhere between 60 and 100 Celsius. He published his findings in 1863 and patented the process in 1865, and today we know it as pasteurization. This was a big deal for France's economy, since pasteurization allowed the French to export more wine. But of course, this is a medical history channel, so we gotta talk about the medical applications. Because some of the people reading Pasteur's work were doctors who started applying his ideas to real-world medicine. Most notably, a surgeon in Scotland named Joseph Lister read Pasteur's work on fermentation and thought it might help him in the surgical ward. Recent advancements in surgery, like anesthesia in the 1840s, made surgery more accessible, but way too many patients were dying from infections after surgery. After reading Pasteur's work, Lister reasoned that if putrefaction and fermentation started when a substance was exposed to air, then sanitizing the air around an open wound should prevent infection. And his air sanitizer of choice was just so miasma-inspired. He'd heard of a town in Germany that sprayed this stuff called creosote on their sewage to keep down the bad smells. And since everyone thought the smells associated with garbage were the same as the ones in putrefaction and infection, Lister thought this trash deodorant might work against infection too. Creosote is a byproduct of tar manufacture, so he tried a bunch of other tar derivatives before arriving at phenol, or carbolic acid. When he sprayed this stuff on his surgical patients, death from post-op infection fell from 45% to 15%. This became known as antiseptic surgery. I got a video all about it that you can find here. Antiseptic surgery was a cool application of this thing that was becoming known as germ theory, but scientists still didn't
Completely new, and there was a lot of people that didn't want to accept antiseptic surgery, or even just like antiseptic practices in the surgical rooms, regarding the Hungarian fellow I was referring to earlier in the stream who ended up dying in a mental asylum because of him being driven mad by miasmists and fundamentalists of like the doctrine, disliking and detesting his rampant efforts to push people to actually prevent natal uh um fatalities, mom and kid dying, or even just the mom dying and the kid surviving. Childbirth was brutal like that because they weren't washing their hands with like antiseptic stuff like that. They sometimes weren't even just rinsing the blood off their hands. They go there covered in blood, and then produce a birth soaked in blood from the morgue. Not just like, I mean, it's bad enough if it was like blood from someone who wasn't dying and facing the putrefaction that a corpse faces. A corpse is always going to have a more deadly microbiome than a living thing. I think we can all agree on that one, except maybe RFK. Both that he is worse than a corpse microbiome wise, and that he would not agree with the position. Double entendre there.
Surgery was a cool application of this thing that was becoming known as germ theory, but scientists still didn't really know what caused disease. So let's go back to France. Between 1855 and 1865, there was this big outbreak of pepper disease, or pébrine, in France's silkworm population. The worms developed these little brown spots and lost their ability to spin silk, which was important because France exported a lot of silk. In 1865, a few scientists started trying to figure out what was causing the epidemic, including Pasteur, who had been commissioned by the French government, and Béchat, who funded his own research. And of course, according to Béchat's own reports, he figured it out right away. He claimed the disease was caused by a zyme called pébrine that lived on the outside of the worm's eggs, and a quick spray with carbolic acid ought to fix the problem. Pasteur thought Béchat was full of crap. He thought there was no way there was a germ on the outside of the egg. He's quoted as saying, "I should be as happy as those persons who, like Béchat, acquire ideas without the need to first accumulate facts." It's a sick insult, but Pasteur hadn't done any better. He thought maybe the disease behaved kind of like cancer, or maybe tuberculosis. He didn't know for sure, but he was certain Béchat was wrong. But after 2 years of making little to no progress, a few German colleagues convinced Pasteur that Béchat was onto something. In an 1867 letter to the Secretary of the Agricultural Committee, he admits, "Poor Monsieur Béchat is at this moment one of the most curious examples of the influence of preconceived ideas gradually turning into fixed ideas. All his statements are so biased that I wonder if he has ever observed more than 10 silkworms in his life." Clearly, Pasteur was a very humble guy. Now, microzymes aren't a real thing, but Béchat's idea that something was attacking the eggs from the outside was likely correct. Unfortunately, his attempts to stop the disease by spraying the silkworms with carbolic acid weren't working, so Pasteur came up with a new idea. He thought that if you separated the diseased silkworm cocoons from the healthy ones, you might be able to at least stop the spread of disease. Luckily, it worked. So Pasteur got credit as the hero since his invention once again saved the French economy. Béchat, on the other hand, never saw the spotlight again. But put a pin in that, because Béchat shows up towards the end of the story. Pasteur thought these diseases might have been caused by microbes that putrefied in worms' bodies, kind of like how we saw microbes ferment wine. He ended up isolating 2 different types of bacteria and found that each one was found in a different disease. And this turned out to be one of the most important insights in germ theory, because Pasteur was showing disease specificity, the idea that a specific disease is associated with a specific bacteria. But that was an association. Scientists still hadn't shown the cause and effect relationship between germs and disease yet. And Pasteur would start to make that connection thanks to an international rivalry with a German scientist named Robert Koch. Also, his name is properly pronounced Koch, but that one pronunciation took me like 5 tries, and if I'm gonna get through this script in one sitting, I need to Americanize it. Sorry to the Pasteur Koch. Also, his name is properly pronounced Koch, but that one pronunciation took me like 5 out there. Robert Koch was 20 years younger than Pasteur, and a much better student. In 1862, when he was 19 years old, Koch started at the University of Göttingen, and after a few semesters, started working for a scientist we've mentioned already, Jacob Henle, the guy who said, here's how you would prove a germ caused disease, but it's impossible. After graduating, Koch moved out to rural Germany and started studying anthrax, a bacterial infection that was wrecking local livestock populations. And this research would turn into the experiment that Henle said was impossible. Earlier researchers had already identified Bacillus anthracis as a potential cause of anthrax, so Koch knew what to look for in the animals. He took samples from the spleens of cows and sheep that had died from anthrax, gave it to lab mice, and watched them develop anthrax. And here's the innovative part. Henley assumed he'd only be able to take samples of bacteria from the infected animal after they'd died, but Koch came up with a way to extract tissue from the animals while they were still alive. And since they were still alive, the bacteria could keep multiplying, which gave him an endless supply of uncontaminated Bacillus anthracis to give to mice. Then he'd take that bacilli and culture it, meaning he let the bacilli reproduce in some kind of medium. He very cleverly used the goop inside ox's eyes for this experiment. Then he'd take that pure culture, inject it into healthy animals, and watched as they develop anthrax.
Mandem's first option was eye goop. He like fucking you could say he was a goopy goober. Not a goofy goober, a goopy goober. Which sounds very cummy.
Then he'd extract bacilli from the newly infected animal, put that on a slide, dye it to make it more visible.
Well, that's it. I don't know if anthrax is the long ones that are chained. They form these like really long structures. I mean, similar to like the E. coli we saw in the stool sample. Um, well, you know, Bill and Rose. Anthrax is able to sporify, so it can. That's why you had like the letter the use of it as a chemical weapon. Again, this is what I mean about how these epidemiological problems are not over. It's not hard to find anthrax if you know your microbiology. That's all I'm saying. Like it's in the soil. It's the same as like we were talking about Clostridium tetani earlier. Clostridium tetani, the microbe that causes tetanus, is a microbe that's just found in dirt. It has nothing really to do with rust. It's just rust's an easy way to get that kind of nasty dirt in your system. Clostridium tetani exists as spores in the dirt, just like what's it? Just like Bacillus anthracus does. Um, what's There's a lot of other microbes that do take this sporification route as a way to protect themselves from harsh environments, and they can live like in spore mode, like because it's a little different than like the spores you get from, let's say, like a mycelium, like those are breeding spores. These are survival spores, so they're sporifying themselves. And basically it's a way of like shutting down their metabolism and their existence and essentially becoming dead. Like, I mean, not really. It's still living and doing everything it needs to maintain its existence as a spore, which is a lot of waiting for conditions to reach the time when they cannot be spores. And that's a constant relationship with like our microbiome and how we uptake and or inhibit positive or negative aspects of our microbiome and how we utilize it. Um, but yeah, sorry, I'm rambling a bit.
And looked at it under the microscope. And this was a big frickin' deal. These experiments with anthrax were the first time that someone had isolated a microorganism and caused disease with it. Remember specificity. These animals didn't develop cholera or syphilis, they were given Bacillus anthracis and developed anthrax. This was the start of modern germ theory. In 1876, Koch published The Etiology of Anthrax Disease based on the developmental history of Bacillus anthracis. And in 1877, he published on anthrax again, this time describing the bacillus in even more detail. He even included a photo of it, one of the first photos of a bacterium ever. In an 1878 paper, he said, a photo of it, one of the first photos of a bacterium ever.
My God, it's pretty, like actual photographs. See, I mean, this is, yeah, I was correct. Like old bright field microscopy was black and white. My God, it's so cool. But yeah, look at the anthrax. See, it forms these long chains. On this one, you see these long chains of anthrax, and then he has exposed it to the oxygen, and you can actually see from this picture, it's quite far out, but they're sporifying. And that's a way to protect themselves while they're not in, environments that are suitable for them, which for anthrax, it's anaerobic, if I remember rightly. Let me make sure I'm not saying something stupid. It's always good to do that, Bacillus. It's always remember, no capital letter for the species name. It's only for the genus. Bacillus anthracis is a I say anaerobic. Oh, it's aerobic. Okay. So, oh, wait, sorry. Is an aerobic endospore forming bacterium that exists in a wide range of natural environment and ecosystems. It's the only obligate pathogen of animals, including humans, mammals, and insects. So it's an obligate parasite, but like, is it like strictly aerobic? Like, man, this is getting me in a rabbit hole. I'm on the Bacillus anthracus rabbit hole. My God. Chat, what is it doing? What is it doing, chat? I'm the like, what am I doing? Bacillus belongs to the Bacillus cereus groups of Bacillus species consisting of other opportunistic pathogens like B. cereus and B. thuringiensis, is most related to Anthracus. Um, The cells of B. anthracus are gram-positive rods that are aerobic, facultative anaerobes that are capsulated and can form spores. Okay, that's what I was getting confused on. So they can do facultative anaerobic existence, but like they are otherwise aerobic. So that means that they require oxygen to exist. Then why, when do they finite anaerobes that can survive in both the presence of and absence of oxygen? They can switch between metabolism. They can switch their metabolism between aerobic respiration when oxygen is available and fermentation or anaerobic respiration when it is not. It's usually nitrogen. This acceptability allows them to produce energy efficiently depending on their environmental conditions. Examples of facultative anaerobes include um, Escherichia coli, um, Escherichia coli or E. coli, Staphylococcus, of any specimen, and Salmonella. Um, Salmonella is also a bacterium. I don't know if we all know. What's the genus name of Salmonella? Um, I don't know what the species is for Salmonella. Um, Salmonella enterica and Salmonella bongori. Badass names. Okay, that was worth looking at. Bongori. I'm gonna go with that one. That's my head canon for um it's my head canon for that, for that microbe. Um Lactic acid fermentation. Um it's really getting into listeria a bit there, eh? Ecological significance, phytolytic anaerobes. During anaerobic respiration, they use inorganic substances like nitrite, sulfate, furanate, sulfur, etc., as terminal electron acceptors. Hence, they play important roles in biochemical processes and nutrient cycling. We have like the nutrients that our plants rely on isn't the most common form of nitrogen. And Our plant systems that we've had for an ungodly amount of time allowed us to you know, produce that nitrogen over these billions of years with those little archaea and bacteria that grew up in those hydrovents that were strictly anaerobic. Just the whole question of the deep blue gets into like real deep quandaries with what capitalist society's taken us. But um, yeah, I just thought I would clear that up regarding that. I would like to know what the cause for sporification then. Um, why does bacillus and racus um oh my god, I'm clumsy. My bad. What was I trying to figure out? Shit. Oh my god. It was on Bacillus amphracis, but that was it. How and when does Bacillus amphracis form spores? Amphracis is a non-motile. Bacillus amphracis is non-motile, a trait that sets it apart from many other Bacillus species that possess flagella for movement. This lack of motility is compensated by the ability to form spores. They are highly resistant to extreme conditions that can remain dormant for extended periods. The spores are oval shaped and located centrally within the vegetarian cells, a feature that aids in their identification under a microscope. Um, Spore formation. That's actually what I wanted to know about. The ability of Bacillus amphracis to form spores is a defining characteristic that contributes significantly to its persistence and virulence. When environmental conditions become unfavorable, such as nutrient deprivation or extreme temperatures, the bacterium initiates a complex process known as sporulation. This transformation is triggered by a cascade of genetic and biochemical events that result in the formation of a highly resistant structure, the spore. Sporulation begins with the asymmetric division of the bacterial cell, which creates a smaller prespore and a larger mother cell. The prespore is engulfed by the mother cell, leading to the development of a double-layered membrane around the prespore. But this double membrane is wait one second, what was I trying to say? The prespore is engulfed by the mother cell, wanting to take back. No one is. Um, leading to the development of a double-layered membrane around the prespore. This double membrane is fortified by the deposition of um um. Sorry, I'm getting a bit caught up in this. As the spore matures, it acquires additional protective layers, including a proteinaceous um coat that shields it from enzymes and other antimicrobial agents. This coat is compensated of various proteins that would form a robust and impermeable uh, um, yeah, might have to do the other cholera video later. I'll just cover the germ theory thing though, because I'm a bit exhausted. I don't know if you can tell.
In an 1878 paper, he says, you should be able to repeat the same process for any disease-germ combo and find the cause of disease. So just like his mentor did in 1840, Koch outlined step-by-step instructions to show causation. You'd have to find the germ in all subjects with the disease. Then when you put that germ into a new animal, the animal would have to get the same disease, and each disease would be caused by a distinct germ. This process would become known as Koch's postulates, sometimes Henle-Koch's postulates to acknowledge mentorship. Koch ran into some issues with the postulates over the years, which we're going to talk about at the end of the video. But by 1878, he had a good method for identifying causative agents of disease. At this point, Louis Pasteur decides to get involved with his own anthrax research. And at first, he mostly copy-pasted Koch's work and claimed it had never been done before, which at this point, you probably expect from Pasteur, but this was pretty light considering what was about to come. Because as soon as Koch published his anthrax work, Pasteur started working on an anthrax vaccine. See, Pasteur had successfully made a vaccine against chicken cholera a few years earlier with a technique called attenuation, which involves creating a weakened version of the germ, then introducing that attenuated germ to your immune system, letting you build immunity to the pathogen without getting sick. Some modern vaccines are live attenuated vaccines, but it was brand new back then. Pasteur found that the bacteria that causes chicken cholera got weaker after just letting it replicate a bunch. But that same technique didn't work to attenuate the anthrax bacillus. So he and his team tried using heat, and found that the germ lost its ability to make its host sick when it was heated between 42 and 43 Celsius. We'd say that's a less virulent form of the germ. This became their vaccine candidate. Always the showman, Pasteur did a very public experiment in 1881 where he successfully vaccinated a bunch of sheep against anthrax. Successful in the fact that the sheep that were vaccinated lived, and he got a bunch of media attention for it. At this point in history, Germany and France hate each other, so Koch and Pasteur's rivalry takes on this international competition. And after the anthrax vaccine demo, Koch accuses Pasteur of cherry picking. But this kind of goes past a good faith critique of the science and gets a little too ad hominem in my opinion. Pasteur follows the tactic of communicating only favorable aspects of his experiments, and of ignoring even decisive unfavorable results. Such behavior may be appropriate for commercial advertising, but in science it must be totally rejected. At the beginning of his Geneva lecture, Pasteur placed the words, "Nous avons tous une passion supérieure, la passion des vérités." We have no passion greater than the passion for truth. Pasteur's tactics cannot be reconciled with these words. His behavior is simply inexplicable. Koch was not messing around. Koch moved into a new and improved lab by 1880, and at that point, it was game on. In 1882, Koch discovered Mycobacterium tuberculosis, the bacteria that causes TB. And that same year, Pasteur came up with a vaccine for rabies, making it the first human vaccine created with germ theory. You bet I'll have a video about that one. In 1883, Koch went off to Egypt to study cholera, and using his postulates, he attempted to isolate Vibrio cholerae, the bacteria that causes cholera. He'd moved on from culturing bacteria in cow eyeball fluid and tried using nutrient-dense broths. Unfortunately, this media wasn't suited for isolating bacteria since everything grows in broth, which made finding the germ of interest quite the challenge. Gelatin seemed like a promising alternative, but certain microbes broke it down too easily and it melted at way too low of a temperature to be useful. But one day, one of the lab assistant's wives, Fanny Hess, had an idea. She'd been making vegetable jellies with this substance that fit all
Hess. Is she related to Hess? Big question for chat is because I'm not going for Wikipedia again. I'll end up tiring myself out. Fanny Hess. What's the betting? She related to fucking what's his Nazi face? Rudolf Hess? Who knows? Looks a bit like him. So maybe it's his mom.
Fanny Hess had an idea. She'd been making vegetable jellies with this substance that fit all the criteria the lab was looking for. It was clear, it had a high melting point, and it turned out it didn't get broken down by bacteria. This substance was called agar, and the Koch lab started using it right away to culture isolated species of bacteria, a super useful technique when you're trying to identify the single microbe that causes the disease. Then another assistant designed a circular glass dish that they could use to contain the agar. The assistant's name was Julius Richard Petri, giving us the Petri dish. And this was another huge game changer. The combination of Petri dish plus agar let scientists culture tons of new types of bacteria and are still in use today. So using pure cultures, Koch could ask whether Vibrio cholerae actually caused cholera or whether it just showed up in the intestines during cholera. Unfortunately for Koch, the bacteria only causes the disease in humans, so he wasn't able to test in animals, but he still was able to show that cholera never happened without the cholera bacteria. And that brings us to one of the big modern misconceptions around germ theory, that Koch's postulates are strict rules that need to be followed to show causation. Koch himself never considered his postulates to be hard criteria for determining cause and effect of disease. They were a useful starting point, and sometimes worked perfectly, but Koch himself didn't see them as gospel. In fact, in 1884, Koch published a paper about tuberculosis where he modified his postulates into the version that most biologists know today. Points 1 through 3 are basically repeats of his original postulates. There must be a germ in every case of the disease. That germ must be a unique living microbe that can be distinguished from other microbes, and there must be a logical mechanism for the germs to cause the disease. Points 4 and 5 came from this new tuberculosis research. You must be able to isolate and culture this germ outside of the test animal, and finally, when you put that germ into a new animal, that new animal has to develop the same symptoms as the original animal. Again, this wasn't a prescription for how to find new germs, but it did work for TB. And while there were definitely holdouts, which I'll talk about in the next section,
like a certain cholera, a certain protein. I mean, 'cause a lot of this stuff is just proteins and stuff. A certain protein that emits a certain antibiotic behavior can be more harmful in certain animals than it is in others. You know, there's animals that can carry Yersinia pestis without just instantly like succumbing to septicemic plague. I think it still eventually kills those animals, but like I'm not sure on that one. I'm pretty sure they got like a symbiotic thing going on or some shit, or parasitic. Yeah, Yersinia pestis exists in prairie dogs and stuff like that. I mean, obviously you got the Asian rat, was always the big show off one to point at. Insert in the racism and stuff here. But like, because that's what a lot of the stuff always ended up being, you know, a healthy dose of miasma theory mixed in with some age-old colonial racism, and that bigotry rages on today. RFK Jr. Again, I'm gonna be railing off so much about that motherfucker in the time coming because he represents a big fight. Sorry, a big plight against the progress of germ theory and what it has brought to the world. I don't think a lot of us really truly grasp how important germ theory was for field of medicine, let alone like this epidemiological discussion and the rabbit hole I've took us into because I decided that rabbit holes are an incredibly fun thing to jump down. This What RFK is doing to the CDC, it's doing to the Healthy Human Services, just everything about their functions, the way he's aiding and abetting the gutting of science in the medical field, especially, but anti-science in general, and seems to be a bit fond of Monsieur, Monsieur Bachan. I can't speak French. I'm so sorry, French viewers. I don't know if I have anyone in France who views my thing. And most of the people end up being Americans, surprisingly or not. Got a lot of American traffic. I talk about a lot of American politics, though, so I'm kind of stuck in that issue of America constantly dominates our politics. So we're like, okay, well, whatever's going on in America is heading its way here soon. So it's like getting a head start sometimes. I mean, sometimes it's the other way around. I mean, the UK, I'd argue, was quicker onto the fucking turf shit and the transphobia the neo-turf stuff with the so-called rad femmes who lost all their radicality and just turned into neo-lib fascist so-called feminists. You know, they seem so devoid of anything relative towards the term feminist. It's so ill-fitted for them to even use the word. I call TERFs trans-exterminatory racist fascists because I think it's more descriptive of what they represent as a collective.
New germs, but it did work for TB. And while there were definitely holdouts, which I'll talk about in the next section, this is when other medical professionals start accepting germ theory. Okay, so while Koch was working on TB and cholera, Louis was getting ready to go institutional. He and his team opened the Pasteur Institute in 1888, and after that, scientists there found everything. By the turn of the century, scientists had used germ theory to identify the causative agents of gonorrhea, then plague, then dysentery, tetanus, and staph infections, many of which happened thanks to the scientists at the Pasteur Institutes. Pasteur himself died in 1895 and was buried at the Pasteur Institute in Paris. Koch remained a living legend in the scientific community, until one high-profile professional embarrassment that I talk about in this video. Now, in general, the medical profession starts accepting germ theory in the 1880s and applying it in the 1890s. By the time of Robert Koch's death in 1910, most serious scientists and physicians were on board with germ theory. But like with any revolution, there were holdouts. Remember that French scientist who hated Pasteur, Antoine Béchat? He proposed an alternative to germ theory called terrain theory, which said our bodies served as homes, or terrain for zymes, and when we're unhealthy, the terrain becomes easier for those zymes to turn into bacteria and cause disease. Béchat didn't see disease as a battle between perfectly sterile bodies and dirty bacteria. He thought of it as more like an imbalance. Béchat died in 1908, after which some of his followers posthumously published his final work in the 1911 book, The Blood and Its Third Element. I read this thing, and he wasn't exactly subtle with his goal. His main hypothesis was that he was right all along and that Pasteur was both wrong and also plagiarized Béchat's correct ideas, which don't seem like compatible accusations. He starts off with a bang, comparing himself to Galileo. You know, he's being silenced by the system and the scientific community was out to get him. Then he describes how everything scientists know about blood coagulation is all wrong. He claims that the component of blood that clumps blood cells together into clots, what's called fibrin, is actually a, quote, false membrane of microzymes. Therefore, zymotic terrain theory is really the one true theory of disease, and germ theory is wrong, and Pasteur should be disgraced. Obviously, there were some big jumps in logic there, but I think
interesting is that if Bashar wasn't such a chauvinistic ignoramus, he actually would have been onto something about germ theory that was going to become to understood in the 20th and also 21st century as the microbiome. We still don't understand the microbiome fully. We're still grasping it, you know. We know how it works, like tangentially. That's why, like, you can see fecal transplants being done like fucking centuries ago without any idea that, like, you're introducing microbes into someone else's ass. Um, you know, it was just like a consideration people had for bad gut, like just like yeast and beer and stuff like that. Figured it out, bada bing, bada boom. Ah, you see, it's related to this microbiome that we all have. Well, like, you know, in the 1800s, we didn't really understand the microbiome very well. And so if he wasn't so focused on the zyme theory and he picked up germ theory, he could have actually been a pioneering scientist in the idea of the microbiome if he had applied his understanding of terrain theory, as he calls it, to a germ theory world, like a Pasteurian vision, I guess, is what I'm saying. But his hatred for Pasteur and for real science was what really drove Bashar.
even fans of Béchat recognize that this book isn't about communicating his science, it's about his reputation. Men will literally invent new models of disease instead of going to therapy. This book is where the trouble started. Antoine Béchat kicked off the disease instead of going to therapy. This book is where the trouble started. Antoine Béchat kicked off the germ theory denialism that's still around to this day. Béchat's followers were obsessed with him. The preface to the 1911 translation of the book refers to him as an all-caps master and says the master's arch-plagiarist Pasteur is dead, though his evil work lives. I would like to point out, though, that Béchat refers to this evil work, germ theory, as the greatest scientific silliness of this age, which, come on, that's adorable. A few years later, in 1923, a woman named Ethel Douglas Hume published Béchat or Pasteur, a lost chapter in the history of biology. And it's another agenda first, science second kind of a book. I have links to this one and all my sources in the description. Most of the book is about how Pasteur plagiarized everything and Béchat had been silenced his whole career, but really, all of this is a setup so that the author can go on an anti-vax rant saying that vaccines are the worst tyrannies imaginable and should be resisted even to the death of the official who is enforcing it. So yeah, she had some strong opinions.
Like this is what Bashar and like the miasmatists, the Zyme theorists, all these dickwads that didn't want to accept germ theory were pushing, and that we got in the. I mean, this like there was I'm pretty sure this woman's work was pushing against the 1930 1932 influenza vaccine. I can't remember when they come up with the vaccine for the flu. Um, was it? I'm sure it was. Yeah, say.
And Beshah had been silenced his whole career. The worst tyrannies and set up so that the author. I have links to this one and all my sources in the description. Most of the book is about how Pasteur. 2 years later, in 1923, a woman named Ethel Douglas Hume published Beshah or plagiarized everything, and Beshah had been silenced his whole career.
Maybe I was
really,
a bit late
all of
on
this
the
is a setup so that the author can go on an anti-vax rant, saying that vaccines
we
are
didn't
the
know it was
worst
a
tyrannies
virus.
imaginable, and should.
I mean, we knew that it was like smaller than like the average Pasteur, like because it's like Pasteur filterable. So like we knew that it was able to be it was smaller than a bacterium, but we didn't have the ability to really see a virus until the 30s, I think.
Be resisted even to the death of the official who was enforcing it. So yeah, she had some strong opinions. The rest of the book covers the usual anti-vax talking points, but my favorite part was the line where she recommends that everyone adopts a raw vegan diet and it'll be literally impossible to get sick again. This book was essentially Goop before Gwyneth, and the reviews from this time are just incredible. The scientific journal Nature reviewed it in 1924 and said, "This book is an attempt, not the first in recent years, to resuscitate the name of Beshah and his microzymus theory, which was presumed to have been utterly demolished by the labors of Pasteur. The work is replete with extravagant language on the virtues of Beshah and a tirade of the defects, if not vices, of Pasteur as an investigator. Beshah is described as a rare luminary of science, a supreme benefactor of humanity. We are told that he stood on an ethical plane above his fellows, that truth, not self, was Beshah's lodestar, and he is compared to Galileo. The solid fact remains that most of his work has been discredited as inaccurate, and although
fucking hogwash that gets pushed by all these fucking anti-scientist dillweeds with their fucking like anti-science ramblings. Beshar and his followers constantly pushing their need to be the Galileo. I fought against the great Louis Pasteur in his attempt to make my milk not have Listeria bacterium inside of it. I want to have Listeria bacteria inside my milk. Like RFK, he's bringing the Listeria back into the home. You can have lactic acid in your milk again. I mean, you can do that anyway if you let your milk go bad, because as I was saying, listeria can still emerge in milk even after you've pasteurized it. Pasteurization isn't a foolproof method. It's just a less likely to spoil method by monumental degrees. It's not about whether it's perfect; it's about the fact it works. And like we look at pasteurized compared to unpasteurized. You've got, oh, if you leave it open for like a couple weeks or a week, I don't know how long for I drink vegan milk at the moment, so I can't remember the it's all about how cold your fridge is, and I have my fridge very cold, so my milk would always last quite a bit. But like when you smell it and you smell, that's lactic acid from the bacteria, Listeria. I think it's Listeria. Forming eating the lactulose in the milk and then producing a lactic acid as a byproduct of their consumption. Not to be confused with the condition consumption. I should do a video on that. What's it? Consumption video. Um, Consumption is so the condition typhoid. I think it's the condition. Yeah, I think it's typhus. Um, or is it something else? It's the most deadly bacterium. Like I think that we've ever dealt with. Um, Tuberculosis. That's it. Sorry, not fucking. Yeah, I'm all about tuberculosis. Um, Hank's brother did a good piece on that. That wouldn't be a bad video to sit and watch sometime. My head's pounding. I'm recovering from a night of shroomies, so I'm a bit ghosted. Sorry, people. I mean, I just did this on the spur. I was just like, fuck it. I have bad confidence and bad motivation issues. So I just threw a ball. I was like, fuck it. I want to talk about Vibrio cholerae, and y'all are gonna put up with my interests in microbiology. You're going to swallow it. You're going to accept it. RFK says one day you will believe my asthma is the real pathogen of cholera. Jon Snow, he lied about the water. He lied saying we need to have sanitary water. RFK is restoring fecal matter to our water supply, our great American water supply. Vibrio cholerae is not a threat so long as the streets smell good. Like that's the world we live in. It's the horrifying world we live in. Like RFK Jr. is taking us backwards, and I mean I'm focusing on cholera because it's a fun bacterium to talk about. But there's a lot worse than just cholera out there. It's not the only nasty thing in the water. And to think that like it's far away if it's not already still lurking around the waters. Remember the Jon Snow quote? Latin America. Central America has pretty bad outbreaks. Caribbean has pretty bad outbreaks. Haiti has very bad outbreaks, especially. And you get it in South America as well. So very close to the United States. All over Asia and Africa, outbreaks go on all the time. Epidemics go on all the time. Cholera is a real present issue, and it's one of many microbes that are pathogenic, i.e., that they cause disease. We got really considerate about that. We should know about how the ones most like frequent in our water supply work. Like if you lived in uh uh um uh, uh let's say you live in some place on the west side of the River Nile where you have, let's say, like West Nile virus, and you've also got the guinea worm or stuff like that. Those things are things that you would then need to know about as maybe not as an individual communist, but as a collective group of communists. There should be some formal understanding of the dangers of what the waterborne pathogens bring, especially in unsanitary environments. And like communists as scientists, science communicators need to engage with both the science of the matter and the need to communicate that science effectively. And I find that these not so much from this video, but again back to the Jon Snow video from before. The thing is so iconic about Jon Snow is his rigor in stomping the streets and checking the barefoot things. I mean, it was beautiful to look into his thing and find out, yo, what my fucking my favorite fucking practitioner in the Victorian period when I was learning about medicine through time and history, because there's not really anyone good in the Victorian period. List is fun. But like Jon Snow and William Farr are outstanding in their dedication to human population-wide health. And then it's like, oh yeah, and Jon Snow comes from a working class background. His father was a hard laborer, you know. He managed to get an educational degree and all that, but given that man basically killed himself testing some of the most poisonous shit as anesthesia, that's what caused his stroke and his untimely demise at 45. You know, he was very dedicated to the labors of his craft, and brought that iron will and iron discipline of the working class into his developments upon the field of epidemiology. It was just a beautiful thing. It fits well with my already pre-existing understanding is kind of the fun part. I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense to like, you know, why he's speaking. He's speaking. I mean, we read into the article. He's speaking as someone who grew up in those slums, drank unsanitary water as a kid, and paid the price for it. And ever since he had been an adult, he refused to drink water until the end of his life that hadn't been boiled first. Like that was a prerequisite for him. He was a very class conscious guy by the seems of things. I want to see if there's anything political he's touched upon because I'm interested. Like this guy is intriguing man. Nice to see what Marx has said of the situation at the time as well. I mean the Karl Marx was in Britain in the 1850s, so like in London, of all things. So the Soho epidemic would have been something Marx would have been around and knew of. You'd at least have known of the 1866 um, uh, cholera outbreak, but I feel like a sociologist would have also known about the 1832 and the 1848 outbreaks. So it'd be nice to see if like there's ever any mention from any of the contemporary Marxists of the time on the cholera outbreak, because I just do think that there's been a long-standing history of communists dropping. I don't mean with the colonized groups and what they do out there. They are more considerate of these things, but there's still failings internationally, collectively as communists. But I do think it lopsidedly more predominates to the imperial core in that we don't focus on epidemiology, not in a real sense, especially in the imperial core, with the way that you can take advantage of how sterile things have become because of the exorbitant amount of technology that we get to exploit from around the world. That we can create mega cities which are not functional and will never be functional, somewhat sanitary, somewhat clean enough that you can make a profit off of those places, while also dingy and poor enough that you got desperate people. Take that. Now, New York has that whole thing going on for it, but take it, make it extremely more dense, and then, have several parishes that cover that patch of territory, and they all have different governments and different laws and uh, dictates. Um, but like, fuck, what was it I was saying? I lost myself. I'm sorry, chat. I have been up way too long. We're gonna get through the Jam Theory video and then I'm gonna go to bed.
Though he wrote an immense amount, he plunged deeper and deeper into error. However high the opinion of the author is on the virtues of Béchat, he has utilized a fair part of the book to exploit his own antimicrobic and anti-vaccination views. Basically, even the review was like, yeah, this is thinly veiled anti-vax propaganda. And just like a lot of other 19th, early 20th century conspiracy theories, there are still people who believe that Béchat was right all along and we've got microzymes in all of our cells. Just like Hume in 1923, they tend to be into alternative medicine and not into vaccines. But here's the thing, even without Béchat's followers, actual scientists have critiqued and updated germ theory. I mean, it would be bananas if the theory hadn't been refined since 1885. And to come back to the Galileo comparison, it's kind of like how the idea of heliocentrism has been updated and refined to reflect new discoveries in astronomy and physics. The biggest critiques revolve around the consistency of Koch's postulates. And so, in our little conclusion here, let's ask, how have Koch's postulates stood the test of time? After his famous tuberculosis paper, Koch started to notice that the same germ could cause different diseases by different mechanisms. Like, it might give off two different toxins that cause different symptoms, which muddled up postulate number 3. There was also the issue of asymptomatic carriers, people who had the disease in their bodies but didn't show symptoms. And later on in his career, he was never able to get test animals sick with certain diseases like typhoid fever or leprosy, despite giving them the germ, and that violates postulate number 5. And just before Koch died, a researcher at the University of Chicago found a new genus of microorganism that consistently showed up in cases of Rocky Mountain spotted fever. This weird new microbe fulfilled every one of Koch's postulates, except for number 4. It couldn't be cultured in a petri dish. But the researcher found the microbe in so many cases of the disease that he was still pretty sure he'd found a cause and effect situation. He ended up presenting his findings with an appropriate mixture of confidence and caution. In his 1909 paper in JAMA, he says, "In spite of the constancy with which these bodies were found," talking about the germs, "it did not seem justifiable to claim that they represent the microparasite of the disease for 2 reasons. 1, the very complex morphology of the blood, especially in febrile states, when various cells and probably their nuclei are subject to unusual disintegration. 2, because of my inability to cultivate a microorganism of this character from infected blood by the use of ordinary and some unusual culture media, under various conditions of cultivation, or by other means to obtain it in satisfactory condition. Basically, the blood made it hard to see, and I didn't meet postulate number 4, so maybe it's not cause and effect? Luckily, future research would confirm that this germ genus didn't only cause spotted fever, but epidemic typhus as well. This genus of germ was named Rickettsia, after the Chicago researcher who discovered it, Howard Taylor Ricketts. Okay, so Koch was starting to find exceptions in his postulates, and now other researchers were too. But the biggest issue focused on a class of germs nobody had actually seen at that point: viruses. In 1884, one of Pasteur's assistants, Charles Chamberlain, came up with a device that could filter bacteria from a solution which left anything smaller behind. Experiments showed that even when you filtered out the bacteria, the solution could still make experimental animals sick, so there must be something smaller than bacteria that caused disease, which scientists identified as either toxins or viruses. They didn't know anything about the biology of viruses yet, just that there was something physically smaller than bacteria that could cause disease. And by the 1920s, a few scientists proposed the modern idea that viruses actually replicated inside cells. Cool, but this violated Koch's postulates because it meant that viruses couldn't be cultured in agar. They'd need to be cultured in living tissue samples. And that took until 1931, when scientists at Vanderbilt University found an appropriate type of tissue to culture a specific virus. That same year, researchers discovered that influenza was caused by a virus, not a bacteria like they'd thought for decades. I made a video all about how that story influenced vaccine development during the 1918 flu pandemic. You can find it here, and I swear I'm done plugging videos. In 1937, a scientist at the Rockefeller Institute named Thomas Rivers published a paper.
I got things a bit confused. What happened was Bacillium influenzae, which is actually still known as Haemophilus influenzae, I think. H influenzae, just to keep it simple. Bacillus influenzae is not the cause for influenza, turns out, and is just present in the 1918 flu epidemic, and like, because we had already developed bacterial vaccines and they had helped when we then developed an actual flu vaccine. The bacterial vaccines were useful too. I mean, every time you get your flu shot, if I'm to remember rightly, it does like also inoculate you for certain bacterium that are commonly associated, or like found conjugating in the lungs of people suffering from X or Y flu strain. But I might be getting that wrong a bit. Again, maybe 1918 flu epidemic is a conversation to have to push about the failings of the response to the coronavirus.
In 1937, a scientist at the Rockefeller Institute named Thomas Rivers published a paper titled Viruses and Koch's Postulates. In it, he says, with the development of the science of immunology, however, immunological reactions added much to the knowledge of the specific relation of microbes to disease. And now it is possible to bring excellent evidence that an organism is the cause of a malady without the complete satisfaction of the postulates. Basically, we can say that a microorganism causes disease without checking every item off of Koch's postulates. By the 1940s, a bunch of new technologies like electron microscopes became a thing, which allowed scientists to identify viruses faster than ever before. And in 1957, Dr. Robert Hubner published The Virologist's Dilemma, and explained that all this new detection technology was actually a problem. Virologists were finding novel viruses faster than they could study them. Furthermore, there were a bunch of viruses that showed up in both sick people and healthy people. So Hubner proposed that in addition to lab work, viral diseases would need epidemiological evidence too, at least if they wanted to show that a virus caused a specific disease. And research published in the 60s documented how certain acute respiratory diseases behaved even weirder. They found that the same clinical syndrome, the same presentation of signs and symptoms, could be caused by multiple viruses. And that's problematic because different viruses may respond to different treatments. And if you're choosing treatments based on symptoms, you might pick the right treatment for the wrong germ. And lab work doesn't necessarily help the diagnosis either. Depending on the type of illness, scientists couldn't find a causative germ in anywhere from 25 to 75% of cases. And then there was the big question of the 80s and 90s. What causes this new thing, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, or AIDS? Scientists first isolated the human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV, in the 80s, but couldn't find it in anywhere from 20 to 50% of AIDS patients, which violates postulate number 1. In the late 80s, a scientist named Peter Duesberg used that as evidence to support his hypothesis that HIV didn't cause AIDS. He blamed AIDS on recreational drug use and antiretroviral medication, like AZT, which was one of the only AIDS medications available at the time. Needless to say, that hypothesis didn't age well. Then in 1988, a trio of well-respected scientists at the National Cancer Institute responded in the journal Science saying that HIV did cause AIDS, regardless of Koch's postulates. They say the Henle-Koch postulates of 1840 and 1890 were formulated before the discovery of viruses. They are a useful historical reference point, but were not regarded as rigid criteria by Koch himself and should not be regarded today. And these days, the scientific consensus is that HIV does cause AIDS, which is based on the totality of scientific evidence to date. And that gets to the take-home message of this video. Science is a process, and the collective knowledge that science builds grows over time. So we can't think of germ theory as right or wrong. We need a more nuanced view. I think of germ theory more like a foundation that biology builds on. Like we learned that viruses can cause disease. All right, let's refine our criteria. We noticed that chronic diseases couldn't be explained by the same criteria as infectious diseases. Cool, now we have a better idea of what germ theory does and doesn't apply to. We learned that the microbiome is a thing and that not all bacteria cause disease. Cool, let's explore that more too. But the main idea that a disease doesn't happen without the causative germ is still useful and accepted by infectious disease researchers. The virus that causes influenza might not fulfill Koch's postulates, but my annual flu vaccine keeps me from getting the flu because it trains my body to recognize the influenza virus. Rivers encapsulates my feelings on this when, in 1937, he said, "The cause of viral diseases is known, and that Koch's postulates as proposed by him do not have to be fulfilled in order to prove that a virus is the cause of a disease." However, the spirit of his rules of proof still holds, in that a worker must demonstrate that a virus is not only associated with a disease, but that it is actually the cause. The methods for doing this are different from the ones used by Koch, but are equally efficient. Germ theory itself was a massive academic achievement, but the practical applications had a bit of a lag. Doctors in the year 1900 knew the cause of so many diseases and could prevent them fairly well with vaccines, but they didn't have the treatments to fight them once someone fell ill. For that, they would need the biggest therapeutic development in the history of medicine: antibiotics. Check out this video to keep learning.
Okay, as much as I'd love to keep learning with y'all and to get that cholera video from the other channel on the go, I am cooked. Streams all night, fucking streaming for 4 hours. Y'all, this is gonna be the shortest stream in a while. Goddamn, I don't normally do short one. I think 4 hours is still a long one. Y'all are spoiled when it comes to my streams. So, um, you know, I've a in that regard. I love to stay, but I got to go. So I lovely leave yous, comrades. The point I really wanted to make with this content is that, like, this the success of germ theory is under threat by RFK Jr. and the assault of fascism, just as we as Marxists need to be looking into the epidemiology of John Snow and what he was working with and what he was up against. We've also got to then consider what's the paradigm of what we're up against, because he was in a time when shit was trying to shift at least somewhat forward medically. We're in a time when shit's shifting backwards. So how, as communists, we operate in the field of epidemiology is going to be very, very important as time moves forward. And I think we better be wise not to underestimate that factor. Saddam Fastan, Cyosis, Cyrus Don Falston. My Irish is shit. Um, what's it? Love and solidarity. Stay safe. Stay frosty. Keep alive. Keep informed. And keep organized. Slangafall. Oh yeah, the anti-autism stuff as well. That's another stream that we gotta do at some point. That's it. Loving yous and leave yous. Slangafall.